Chapter 648. Fei Jin. Bufang looked at Fei Jin, who was slowly walking out from the crowd, and furrowed his brows. Was he planning to settle scores with him? Was he looking for him because he lost the chef's challenge? Looking at the approaching figures, Bufang let out a sigh of relief. As he stepped onto the ground, his vermilion robe fluttered in the air. He opened his arms and pressed the little girl, Xiaoya, behind him. His gaze was indifferent as he looked around. Fei Jin's face was filled with malevolence, and his eyes were filled with madness. He had lost the chef's challenge, which meant that his career as a chef had come to an end. Even his kitchen knife had been taken away, leaving him with nothing. He originally had the chance to enter the tablet of gluttony, but because of this brat, he had lost everything. He felt as though his heart was about to shatter, and the heartache was indescribable. Hence, he wanted Bufang to die. He wanted Bufang, who had caused all of this to happen, to die completely. Only the death of the instigator would be able to dispel the anger in his heart. He knew that Bufang was extraordinary, as he was able to challenge someone of a higher realm with just a black walk. However, he did not believe that this brat, who had broken through one shackle of the Supreme Being Divine Physique Echelon, would be able to fight against a peak Divine Physique Echelon expert with just a black walk. Among the people that he had called over, one of them was a peak Divine Physique Echelon expert. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, he had put in a lot of effort. Therefore, at this moment, when he looked at Bufang, his eyes were bloodshot. Peak Divine Physique Echelon. Bufang furrowed his brows, and his eyes were filled with a hint of seriousness. If Xiao Bai or you were here, a mere peak Divine Physique Echelon expert would not be a problem at all. However, he was the only one here, and he still had to protect the little girl behind him. Hence, Bufang felt a headache coming on. Of course, Bufang could also choose to use the gourmet array. However, setting up the gourmet array required time, and his opponent would obviously not give him the time to do so. Kill him. The fats on Fei Jin's body jiggled wildly, and the muscles on his face twitched as he let out a loud roar. The eyes of one of the experts behind him flickered as he unleashed his true energy. Terrifying true energy twisted and turned in the air, causing numerous chains of true energy to sway. Walala! The shackles collided, seeming as though they were about to tear the void apart. This was the terrifying pressure of someone at the peak of the divine body echelon. Rumble. That expert's face was grave and stern. He did not speak, but he looked at Bufang with a hint of mockery. As for the fact that Fei Jin had wasted a favor to hire him just to deal with a divine physique echelon who had broken through one of the Supreme Being's shackles, he felt that it was rather laughable. A mere divine physique echelon who had broken through one of the Supreme Being's shackles should be more than enough for Fei Jin to handle. He actually wasted this favor. However, this was good as well. It was not a big deal to owe someone a favor, and it was good to settle it. Therefore, he did his best. As his true energy surged, it was as though a gale had been raised. The surface of the sunset lake rippled slightly, as though it was suppressing something. Bufang took a step back. The velvet rope that tied his hair was blown away by the gust of true energy and immediately snapped, causing his hair to flutter in the air. The vermilion robe on his body fluttered in the wind, and the red radiance on it seemed as though it was about to ignite. Bufang took a deep breath, raised his slender, fair palm, and waved it slightly. Instantly, a bowl of steaming hot rampage ramen fell into his hands. The expert who had just attacked was stunned. This brat was actually eating delicacies during a battle? Who was he looking down on? However, he had heard that this brat had defeated Fei Jin in a chef's challenge. This brat's culinary skills must be pretty good. However, since he had already offended Bufang, he could no longer hold back. He had to eliminate the root of the problem. As he thought of this, the murderous intent in the eyes of the divine physique echelon expert intensified. Boom! The bluestone slabs on the ground were about to crumble under the pressure. A terrifying pressure landed on Bufang's body, and Bufang was about to be pressed onto the ground. Xiaoya timidly stood behind Bufang, and her face was flushed red from the pressure. Although Bufang had helped her block off most of the pressure, The small portion of it still made her feel extremely uncomfortable. Slurp. After finishing the ramen, Bufong expressionlessly stared at the expert who was charging at him. He wiped the corners of his mouth as he felt the true energy within his body boiling, and his aura was rising steadily. The black turtle constellation wok was taken out, and it expanded in size as it smashed toward the expert. A loud boom resounded. The divine physique echelon expert's eyes narrowed, and he took a step back. The black turtle constellation wok spun and fell back into Bufong's hands, and Bufong held it in his palm. Bufong's expression was indifferent. Although he had only broken through one of the Supreme Being's shackles, his current battle prowess was much stronger than before. With a flip of his hand, a steaming hot beef meatball appeared. He lightly tossed it into the air and bit into it. The oily juice splattered everywhere, causing the surrounding experts to stare with their mouths agape. Fei Jin's face was also filled with astonishment. This fellow was actually eating in the midst of a battle. He was indeed as arrogant as ever. As the vigorous beef meatball entered his stomach, Bufong couldn't help but furrow his brows. He could feel the strength in his arms rising rapidly, and his eyes lit up with a divine glow. Holding the black turtle constellation wok in one hand, Bufong took a step forward, and his figure burst forth. There was a whoosh sound. The black turtle constellation wok slashed through the air, as though it was about to shatter the air. The expert's expression froze, and the 5 chains swayed as though they were entangled together. His muscles bulged as he punched the black turtle constellation wok. Bang, bang, bang. Bufong felt as though there was an inexhaustible amount of energy within his body. That expert was actually forced back by Bufong's wok. The surrounding people sucked in a breath of cold air as they stared at Bufong as though they were looking at a monster. Where did this terrifying existence come from? He was actually able to forcefully break through one of the Supreme Being's shackles and fight against a peak divine physique echelon expert. Fei Jin's entire body trembled as he felt a sense of disbelief and despair. Impossible. Kill him. We must kill him. Fei Jin roared. All of a sudden, his eyes shifted and landed on the petite little girl in the distance. The malevolent expression on his face instantly changed, becoming extremely terrifying. There was a whoosh sound. His figure tore through the air and appeared in front of the little girl in an instant. Xiaoya looked at Fei Jin with a face full of fear. The shadow cast by Fei Jin's gigantic body had completely obscured her figure. Bufong glanced in Xiaoya's direction and furrowed his brows as a cold intent flashed across his eyes. He took a step forward, and his figure instantly shot forward in an attempt to stop Fei Jin from attacking Xiaoya. However, the peak divine physique echelon expert invited by Fei Jin was already enraged. He was actually being suppressed by an ant. This was already a huge loss of face. If he still allowed Bufong to escape, he should really find a block of tofu and knock himself to death. Hence, a piercing sound could be heard. The 5 shackles swayed and fell down at the same time. The peak divine physique echelon expert stood in front of Bufong, his face extremely gloomy. You must have used some kind of secret technique to increase your combat strength, right? Since that's the case, you must die this time. A secret technique that could allow a divine physique echelon expert who had broken through one of the Supreme Being's shackles to fight against a peak divine physique echelon expert was definitely extraordinary. This meant that Bufong's background was also extraordinary. Since he had already offended such a person, he had to be completely obliterated. He couldn't leave any traces behind. Otherwise, he would definitely suffer from revenge. Scram! Bufong stared coldly at the expert and said indifferently. The expert's mouth twitched as he punched out with his fist. Bufong furrowed his brows. The golden dragon bone kitchen knife instantly turned into a green smoke that curled up, almost solidifying into a solid substance. The golden radiance was dazzling, as though the knife was made of pure gold. Bufong wielded the incomparably sharp golden dragon bone kitchen knife and swung it horizontally towards the expert. Fei Jin stared coldly at Xiaoya. Looking at this foolish brat, The rage in his heart boiled. If it wasn't for this brat, he wouldn't have had a chef's challenge with Bufong. If he didn't have a chef's challenge with Bufong, he wouldn't have been deprived of his right to cook. The cause of everything was this foolish brat. Bufong had to die, and this brat had to die as well. Fei Jin attacked. This time, he didn't show any mercy. He wanted to slap this brat to death with a single slap. True energy pervaded the air as it condensed in his palm, causing it to become somewhat hazy. However, the power contained within that hazy aura was extremely terrifying. If this slap landed, this brat might not even have a corpse left. Xiaoyu seemed to be aware of this. Although she was still young, her mind was already rather mature. Ever since the death of her loving grandfather, she had experienced too much. She bit her lips tightly as her big eyes stared fixedly at Fei Jin's palm. Deep within her pupils was the reflection of that palm, filled with killing intent. Rumble, within the sunset lake, waves suddenly surged and rolled. Water splashed up into the sky, setting off monstrous waves. The waves then turned into rainwater, turning into a majestic downpour. The rain shrouded everyone within it, causing everyone to be slightly taken aback. Fei Jin's heart skipped a beat. His palm was positioned above Xiaoya's head, and he wanted to slap downwards. However, he realized that he couldn't do so no matter how hard he tried. What was going on? Fei Jin's heart skipped a beat. He met the little brat's gaze. That gaze caused all the fats on his body to tremble, just like a ferocious beast. How terrifying! How could it be so terrifying? As the lake water splashed onto his body, it suddenly seemed to have transformed into a giant hand that tightly gripped onto his neck, causing him to have difficulty breathing. Fei Jin's pupils shrank as he stared at the little brat who had undergone a drastic change. His entire body went limp and slumped onto the ground. From afar, Bufong had also noticed the changes in Xiaoya. His eyebrows twitched as he sucked in a breath of cold air. The sunset lake seemed to be resonating with Xiaoya's transformation. Following the change in Xiaoya's aura, the lake water continued to boil. Within the lake, terrifying gazes shot out from within. Those were the powerful spirit beasts of the sunset lake. However, this was not the focus of Bufong's attention. Bufong looked at Xiaoya. He sucked in a deep breath. This was because at this moment, Xiaoya's appearance had undergone a complete transformation. She had transformed into a mysterious spirit beast that was shrouded in dark energy. Puffed. A human's palm reached out. However, the skin was pitch black, and it emitted a chilling glow. As it slammed down viciously, Fei Jin, whose face was filled with fear, was instantly smashed into minced meat. Shattered. Everyone was shocked, and their hearts were filled with a chill. In the next moment, the spirit beast that was shrouded in dark energy turned its head violently, and its scarlet eyes landed on Bufong and the others. The peak divine physique echelon expert who was originally facing off against Bufong was instantly frightened to the point that he fell to the ground on his buttocks. He stretched out his hands in terror. He was still mumbling in fear, Tao, Tai. Chapter 649. Valley of Gluttony, Lakeside Buildings of the Sunset Lake. The incense slowly lingered, rising in a straight line. Then it spread out, filling the surroundings. A tranquil feeling lingered in the entire room. The sounds of the zither were like small and big pearls falling on a jade plate. An old man, wearing a loose robe with long sleeves like a fan, sat cross-legged on the ground. The incense was slowly burning in front of him. To the side of the incense was a boiling purple clay kettle. Steam rose from the mouth of the kettle. The gurgling sound made the lid of the purple clay kettle tremble slightly. The old man lifted his sleeve with one hand, using a teacup to scoop up some crushed tea leaves. Although the tea leaves were crushed, they still emitted a bright luster. The patterns on them moved, and spirit energy gushed out. With one look, one could tell that it was an extraordinary item. After scooping the tea leaves into a purple clay cup, the old man lifted the boiling purple clay kettle. Swish! Clear and steaming hot water flowed out of the pot and poured into the teacup, causing the jade green tea leaves to swirl within the cup. A clear and cold tea fragrance quickly spread throughout the entire room. When the tea in the teacup became emerald green, the old man poured the tea away. Once again, he poured the boiling hot water, causing the tea leaves to swirl once more. Closing the lid of the teacup, the old man crossed his arms, quietly waiting. The sound of the zither slowly flowed in the room, and it was somewhat leisurely. After a while, the old man opened the lid of the teacup, brought it to his nose, and took a sniff. The faint tea aroma lingered in his nose. The old man's white beard and white eyebrows slightly trembled, and his wrinkled face revealed a satisfied expression. He poured a cup of clear green tea, raised his hand, and raised the small teacup, intending to take a sip. However, just as the tea was brought to his mouth, outside the window, the sunset lake, which was originally sparkling and tranquil like an ancient well, suddenly changed. Raging waves rose on the surface of the lake, and countless huge black shadows appeared. A terrifying aura spread out, as if a terrifying giant beast was about to awaken. A gust of black chi shot into the sky, causing the old man's narrowed eyes to suddenly open. A glint flashed across the old man's eyes, followed by a terrifying shock. Kacha! The teacup in his hand cracked, and the fragrant tea immediately flowed out from the cracks, splashing all over the floor. The cup shattered and fell to the ground. But the old man turned his head to look out the window as if he didn't know what was going on. This aura, that sealed child? Tao Tai? Bufong couldn't help but frown when he saw the terrified look on the peak divine physique echelon expert's face. Bufong could clearly hear that expert's murmur. Tao Tai? The little girl was Tao Tai? How is this possible? Bufong looked at the blood-red eyes that caused goosebumps to appear all over his body. The murderous aura and murderous intent caused goosebumps to form all over Bufong's body. A pitch-black palm, a pitch-black arm, and a rising dark aura at this moment. The little girl seemed to have turned into a murderous beast that only knew how to kill. Fei Jin was dead. He was clawed to death by the monster's claws, and his entire head exploded. He couldn't be more dead. Perhaps, even until his death, he didn't know how he died. He couldn't imagine how a stupid little girl that he could trample on could turn into such a terrifying beast. The surrounding people also looked at the monster that was enveloped by the dark aura with fear. The peak divine physique echelon expert sucked in a breath of cold air. He looked at the demonized little girl as if he had recalled something horrifying. He held his tongue and did not continue to speak. He looked at the monster in fear, then turned around and planned to escape without looking back. The little girl tilted her head, and her face couldn't be seen clearly because of the dark aura. However, her pitch-black skin sent chills down one's spine, and her eyes were like those of a ferocious beast. Whoosh! A loud explosion resounded, and the air seemed to explode as the monster charged forward. Bang, bang, bang! One by one, human figures exploded, and their heads were crushed by the pitch-black palm. The speed of the attack was unimaginable, and no one could react at all. These divine physique echelon experts didn't even know how they died. The peak divine physique echelon expert who was about to escape turned around and saw the exploding corpses. His entire body was covered in sweat. It really is that monster. The peak divine physique echelon expert's body trembled, and he didn't want to think anymore. True energy erupted without any regard for his life, and his speed increased as he tore through the air to escape. However, very quickly, his figure came to a halt, because a pitch-black palm had already pierced through his chest, and his heart was directly crushed by the monster. Crack! It was as if there was a cracking sound. The peak divine physique echelon expert's pupils shrank to the size of a sesame seed. The 5 swaying shackles above his head slowly cracked. With a cracking sound, the shackles all collapsed. The peak divine physique echelon expert fell to the ground, and his life energy disappeared. He died. After slaughtering this group of experts, the little girl, who was wrapped in the dark aura, slowly turned her head. Her scarlet eyes locked onto Bufong's body. Fong frowned, and his heart couldn't help but tighten. Tao Tai! This little girl was actually the incarnation of Tao Tai. Rumble. In the sunset lake, water splashed, as if a giant beast was rushing out of the lake. The black shadow that blotted out the sky shocked everyone. The terrifying giant beast that was curled up in the lake popped its head out, and its huge eyes locked onto the little girl who was wrapped in the dark aura. It opened its mouth and let out a roar. Roar! The lake water exploded with this roar. When the countless experts in the Valley of Gluttony saw this giant beast, their eyes shrank and they sucked in a breath of cold air. What exactly happened? Even this gigantic beast was lured out. Around this giant beast, fish leaped out of the water. The water shimmered, and the bodies of these fish bloomed with splendor. The heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish? When Fong saw these fish leaping out, he was instantly surprised. This was the target of his trip to the Valley of Gluttony. The heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish. The terrifying giant beast opened its huge mouth, which seemed to be able to swallow the world. With a roar, the surrounding lake's surface exploded, and the water splashed up to the sky, as if it had turned into a torrential rain, pouring down in torrents. That mouth was so big, and it was filled with layers of sharp teeth. The little girl, who was wrapped in the dark aura, shifted her scarlet eyes from Fong to the giant beast. Roar! The pitch-black arms slammed on the ground, causing the ground to tremble. The little girl, who was wrapped in the dark aura, opened her mouth, facing the giant beast, and let out a shrill cry. The shrill cry was so sharp that it made Fong's brows slightly furrow. It was really ear-piercing. Following the little girl's shrill cry, the giant beast's roar gradually weakened. In the end, its huge mouth closed, and with a gulp, it actually went back to the bottom of the lake, running away and disappearing. After the little girl's shrill cry, the dark aura on her body gradually dispersed, and her pitch-black arms returned to their normal color. In the end, the dark aura completely disappeared, and the little girl, Xiaoya, also changed back. However, after changing back, Xiaoya directly fell to the ground. When the little girl screamed, Fong's heart felt a little pressured. However, after the little girl changed back, this pressure gradually disappeared. He gently exhaled. He walked over to the little girl on the ground and picked her up. It seemed that because of the movement, Xiaoyu was startled awake. The little girl opened her eyes, looking around suspiciously. Her eyes were filled with confusion. Obviously, she didn't know what she had done just now. A ripping sound rang out. In the sky, the sound of breaking air rang out. There was the neighing of spirit beasts. There was the deafening rumble of wheels. There was the sound of splashing air, and there was the sound of red silk swaying. Countless experts rushed over. However, everything had already calmed down. The sunset lake, which was originally undulating with waves, gradually became ripples, and the giant black shadow sank to the bottom of the lake. What happened just now? Everyone's faces were filled with doubt. They looked around, but they didn't find anything suspicious. There was only the messy corpses on the ground. Could it be that the giant beast just wanted to kill these ants? Many experts thought to themselves. The only ones who survived were Fong and Xiaoya, who had just woken up and was still in a daze. Many people glanced at Fong, and when they discovered Fong's low strength, the corners of their mouths curled up. In the next instant, with faint disdain, they soared into the sky and disappeared. Some people looked deeply at Fong and the little girl in Fong's arms, then turned around and left. This sudden incident finally came to an end. These experts from the various forces and holy lands all turned around and soared into the sky. A mere ant that had broken through one of the Supreme Being's shackles wasn't worth their attention. Since they didn't find anything, the group of people quickly left. However, after these experts from the various forces and holy lands left, an old and stooped figure appeared. This old man had a stooped back, and the wrinkles on his face were like ravines. He wore a loose robe, and his entire person seemed small. He floated in the sky, and his gaze was incomparably deep. He also saw Bufong and Xiaoya. However, unlike the others, this old man's gaze didn't casually sweep around. Instead, he seriously observed Bufong and Xiaoya's cooking skills. A seal child. Who would have thought that the Tao Hie's soul that had disappeared for a long time was actually hidden in a child's body? Swish. His robe fluttered. The old man's beard and white eyebrows fluttered. He landed in front of Bufong, looking incomparably ordinary. There wasn't any frightening aura around him. The little girl's face was filled with confusion. Bufong looked at this old man, and his brows furrowed. He hid the little girl behind him, and his eyes stared straight at the old man. The old man clasped his hands behind his back, and his gaze retracted from the little girl. Finally, it landed on Bufong. Looking at Bufong, the wrinkles on the old man's face suddenly trembled, and he let out a soft cry of surprise. This aura. You're the chef from outside the valley who defeated Rincho in the chef's challenge? Chapter 650. Is this wine? Bufong looked at the old man in confusion. He could smell the scent of wine from the jar. I'll eat this. Xiaoya thought for a long time. The names of the dishes made her dizzy. Bufong's slender fingers gently tapped on the clean table. He looked at the noodle dish made by Chef Ouyang. In the next moment, the old man took a step forward. With a swoosh, he disappeared as if he had torn apart space. Big brother, I heard from my grandfather that only the chefs on the Tablet of Gluttony have the right to open a restaurant in the Gluttony God City. The chefs who can open a restaurant in the Gluttony God City are all second-grade chefs. Xiaoya said. The corners of Bufong's mouth twitched, and he shook his head. The sparkling sunset lake also seemed to be shining brightly. Noodle King Restaurant. I have to see it for myself, Bufong thought to himself. A steaming hot bowl was placed on the table. First-grade chef? Bufong carried the little girl, looking at the gradually dispersing figures around him. He looked at the sunset lake, which had returned to its tranquil state, and gently exhaled. No wonder he dared to call himself the Noodle King. Even Zhou Tong, who had competed with Bufong previously, was only a first-grade chef. He did not expect that the chef of this noodle restaurant was actually a first-grade chef. Bufong was slightly stunned. He realized that a sharp gaze was directly on him. Hence, he had to bring the little girl away to prevent the situation of the soul of Tao Dai from leaking out again. Looking at the current Xiao Yu, his entire temperament was somewhat different. That sharp aura and the faint, terrifying sword intent on his body made people's hair stand on end. The old man also passed the sleeping little girl to Bufong. Self-taught? This row is the noodle dish made by our Noodle King restaurant's first-grade chef, Chef Ouyang Chinfeng. This row is the noodle dish made by Ouyang Chinfeng's disciple. Please take a look and see which one you would like to eat. Of course, the price of the two is different, the lady introduced. In short, it was different from the Valley of Gluttony in Bufong's imagination. The old man's eyes were incomparably deep. He was wearing a long robe and had his hands behind his back as he observed Bufong. After observing for a while, the old man's gaze landed on the little girl behind him. It seemed like it was Xiaoya's first time in the Glutton God City. Her big eyes were filled with curiosity. The next day, he stretched out an old finger and touched the space between Xiaoya's eyebrows. There seemed to be a spot of light quietly blossoming. The moon set and the sun rose. When Bufong brought Xiaoya to the Glutton God City, he was also amazed by this big city. The first thing he saw was the horizontal board. The words Noodle King Restaurant were written on it. He actually dared to call himself the Noodle King. How arrogant. The Glutton God City had a wide-open city gate with a few guards. However, the Glutton God City wasn't sharp. It was like a benevolent old man that welcomed so many people. Xiaoyu, long time no see. Bufong looked at the person in front of him and nodded. Defeated Rincho? Bufong was bewildered. After thinking for a while, he suddenly understood. The Glutton God's banquet officially started today. The entire Glutton God City was boiling with excitement. Countless experts dashed into the Glutton God City from outside the valley. This was much more awesome than the menu in his restaurant. All of a sudden, he realized that this person was someone he knew. Even if his perception was wrong, The spirit beasts in the Sunset Lake wouldn't be wrong. This time, it was lucky that not much was leaked. Only that fellow was lured out. That person had a handsome face and long black hair. His slightly hoarse voice resounded. He carried a long sword on his back. That long sword was incomparably dazzling, blooming with colorful lights. In the hidden dragon continent, many experts would use the glutton god city as their last hiding place. This was also the reason why the Valley of Gluttony was so popular. Looking at you, you seem to be close to this girl. Let her stay with you for a while. Remember, don't expose her identity. Otherwise, it will bring disaster, the old man said. Then, he waved his hand, and a porcelain jar with countless carvings flew out from the old man's hand, flying toward Bufong. Bufong looked at the little girl, extending his hand to pat her head. He said with a smile, "You don't know much about noodles. If you weren't the #1 noodle chef in the Valley of Gluttony, you wouldn't dare to call yourself the Noodle King." Bufong glanced at Xiaoya, mumbling. As soon as Xiaoya entered the city, she seemed to be a little afraid of strangers. She had an instinctive fear of unfamiliar things. She pulled Bufong's sleeve and looked around with her big eyes. Although there was fear on her face, there was also curiosity. Feeling a little interested, Bufong strode forward, pulling Xiaoya toward the Noodle King restaurant. The waitress was a young and beautiful lady with a long ponytail. She smiled at Bufong. If it was really revealed, the terrifying existence in the Sunset Lake would really come out. At that time, it would be really hard to deal with. This was the most different big city that Bufong had seen so far. A big city had a kind of confidence, and it had a kind of foundation. Bufong caught the jar, and a thought flashed through his mind. "You're the chef from outside the valley who defeated Wenrincho in the chef's challenge. I'm from the Valley of Gluttony. I'm not related. You don't have to guess. Oh, my dish is here. We'll talk after eating," Bufong said to Xiaoyu calmly, looking at the ponytailed lady who was carrying a steaming hot dish with a fragrant aroma. Although the business was booming, this shop was quite big. The moment Bufong entered the shop, he found a spot. Bufong raised his head, looking over. Bufong suddenly stopped in front of the shop, turning his head to look. The entire Valley of Gluttony seemed to be boiling, full of vitality. In the bowl, the flames soared to the sky, overflowing with light and color. The rich aroma seemed to condense into a substance. Moreover, even without the soul of the Tao Tai, the old man had an indescribable admiration for the little girl. Bufong was also a little curious. He turned his head to look, smelling the aroma that filled the air. He couldn't help but slightly squint his eyes. Seeing Bufong deny it, Xiaoyu was a little surprised. He knew that Owner Bu's cooking skills were really amazing. If such a skilled chef didn't come from the Valley of Gluttony, then where did he come from? Xiaoya's body trembled, and in the next moment, her heavy eyelids slightly closed. That was because any child who had the soul of the Tao Tai sealed was an inborn chef. Their cooking talents were extremely terrifying. Finally, under Bufong's guidance, she chose a bowl of noodles. However, the aura that had burst out earlier was the aura of the Tao Ye's soul that had leaked out from the seal. The Valley of Gluttony was indeed the holy land of chefs. This place was really suitable for chefs to develop. The ponytailed lady smiled beautifully, putting away the jade talisman. After asking Bufong and Xiaoyu to wait for a while, she turned around and left. The soul of the Tao Tai? What is that? It seems to be very popular. After taking a deep breath, the old man waved his hand, and he had to see it even more. The jade talisman was placed in front of Bufong. A light screen bloomed, and the names of the dishes appeared on that light screen. Finally, the old man lifted his head, using his deep eyes to look at Bufong, the corners of his mouth slightly rising. In the next moment, the ponytailed lady walked in front of Bufong. The Gluttony God City was located by the Sunset Lake. It was incomparably tall, and its city walls were simple and deep, carved with countless arrays. Why did Owner Bu appear in the Valley of Gluttony? Is Owner Bu a chef from the Valley of Gluttony? Xiaoyu said in a hoarse voice. His eyes emitted a bright light. Being able to meet an old friend in a foreign land, of course, he was in a good mood. This person was none other than Bufong's acquaintance from the Light Wind Empire, Xiao Yu. Bufong wore the vermilion robe, calmly walking on the street. On both sides of the street, there were rows of houses. Some of the houses had their doors closed, while others had their doors wide open. Warm air surged, and a fragrant aroma diffused. There were countless people coming and going in the big city. Bufong nodded, flipping his hand to put away the jar of wine. This is the soul-restraining wine. If the same thing happens to the little girl again, you can directly pour this wine on her, the old man said, clasping his hands. These were the shops of the gluttony god city. Indeed, it's the sealed child. The soul of the Tao Tai is sleeping in her body. Sigh, it's been hard on her. The old man sighed. An invisible force immediately spread out. The little girl's face was filled with horror as she discovered that she was actually flying towards the old man. At this moment, Bufong was a little bewildered. A chef from the Valley of Gluttony? Bufong saw many young people wearing the same clothes coming and going. These young people were probably from the same force. What? Noodle King restaurant? No, I can't bring this child back like this. Otherwise, those old fellows in the valley will know that this child is the one with the Tao Ye's soul sealed. The old man furrowed his brows, as if he had thought of something. He stroked his white beard, furrowing his brows. However, he was also suspicious. He was familiar with the person who had set up the seal, so the seal shouldn't have been leaked. Bufong's eyes moved down, seeing the bustling scene of the business. He walked in front of Bufong, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Honorable, long time no see. Compared to the heavenly mist city, the gluttony god city had more resources. At first glance, people would be deeply subdued by its simple and unadorned aura. The Valley of Gluttony didn't only have chefs from the Valley of Gluttony. In other words, although the majority of the chefs in the Valley of Gluttony were chefs, the people who had tasted the food cooked by the chefs were the focus. Bufong slightly arched his brows. "Give me a serving of this flame rain falling flour noodles," said Bufong as he raised his hand, his slender finger pointing at the position of the light screen. When the Light Wind Empire's matter had ended, this Xiao Yu had left the empire for a long journey. Who would have thought that they would meet here? He brought the little girl into the city, stepping on the seemingly crushed stone road. The surrounding houses were arranged in a row, side by side. "Big brother, this Noodle King is very famous in the Valley of Gluttony. I heard that he is the chef who has the most meticulous research on noodles in the Valley of Gluttony." The little girl sat on her seat, raising her head as she said to Bufong. It seemed that the old man in front of him had a close relationship with Wen Rinshou. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said such words. Bufong nodded, not saying anything. "This is the menu of the Noodle King restaurant. What would you like to eat?" said the girl with a smile, holding a sparkling jade talisman in her hand. Before entering the valley, Bufong had met this person. He didn't think that he would meet him again here. From outside the door, a few figures walked in. This ordinary-looking old man, who suddenly appeared, looked at Bufong, the wrinkles on his face slightly trembling. He seemed to be a little doubtful, and also a little curious. This move, on the other hand, made Bufong quite surprised. Chapter 651. Fiery Rain Falling Flour Noodles. This was an extremely dazzling noodle dish. Above the noodle bowl, there seemed to be a brilliance circulating. Amidst the bubbling noodle soup, there was steam rising. Streaks of red sparks suddenly appeared, and in the next instant, they burst apart like blooming flowers. It was too beautiful to behold. This noodle dish is quite magical. Xiao Yu looked at the noodle dish, and his face involuntarily revealed a hint of interest. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he nodded his head in amazement. "You are the sword genius of the heavens' pivot holy ground, Xiao Yu, right?" After the ponytailed lady placed the noodle dish in front of Bufong, she also saw Xiao Yu at the side and said with a smile. Xiao Yu did not expect that the lady would actually recognize him. However, he was not too surprised, and he nodded his head. After he left the Light Wind Empire, he traveled the continent, and not long after, he met his current master, who was also an elder of the heavens' pivot holy ground. He took him in as a disciple and taught him the way of the sword. Moreover, he also displayed unparalleled talent in the way of the sword. He had quite a bit of prestige among the younger generation. Although, because of his cultivation and battle prowess, he was not as good as the saints of the holy grounds, but his reputation still made many people fear him. Bufong did not care about their conversation in the slightest. He picked up his chopsticks and lightly tapped the tip of the chopsticks on the table. He picked up a soup ladle made of an unknown mineral and scooped up a spoonful of steaming noodle soup. The noodle soup was fiery red, and within it there were constantly splashes of light, like withered petals. It was quite eye-catching. Slurp! Bufong sucked the noodle soup into his mouth in one gulp. A wave of heat suddenly exploded in his mouth. His brows involuntarily furrowed, and the expression on Bufong's face became somewhat solemn. The taste of this noodle soup was not bad, and Bufong praised it in his heart. However, he still felt that it was a little strange. He picked up his chopsticks and did not intend to continue drinking the soup. Instead, he began to eat the noodles. Since it was a noodle dish, the most important thing was still the noodles. Swish! The chopsticks reached into the bowl and picked up some noodles. The orange-yellow noodles reflected the light and were extremely dazzling. The noodles were steaming hot, and the soup on the noodles splashed out like flames. It was like a rain of fire. Fiery rain falling flour noodles, worthy of being called fiery rain falling flour noodles. It really lived up to its name. However, Bufong didn't care about these flashy things. He looked at the noodles and raised his eyebrows. Chi-Chi, as soon as it entered Bufong's mouth, its elasticity burst out in his mouth, making Bufong feel as if his mouth was experiencing a massage. The dough was kneaded just right. Furthermore, the noodles were infused with all sorts of unique flavors. It had the medicinal properties of spirit herbs, the fragrance of spirit flowers, and the taste of many precious ingredients. This method of gathering everything into a bowl of noodles was obviously not easy. After finishing a mouthful of noodles, Bufong was quite amazed. The ponytailed lady's attention was focused on Xiaoyu. After all, many people in the Valley of Gluttony were paying attention to this newly promoted character. However, the lady was also paying attention to Bufong. She believed that no one could resist the deliciousness of Chef Ouyang's noodle dish. She believed that this young man would definitely be captivated by Chef Ouyang's delicacy. However, she was soon wrong, because she realized that Bufong didn't gorge himself like the others. Instead, he put down his chopsticks and wiped the corner of his mouth with a cloth. What was going on? Why did this young man stop eating? Could it be that this noodle dish didn't suit his taste? Why aren't you eating? The ponytailed lady asked curiously. Chef Ouyang doesn't like to waste food. If he finds out, you definitely won't have the chance to come to the Noodle King restaurant anymore. The ponytailed lady reminded him kindly. However, Bufong glanced at her, and his reaction was still very indifferent. The noodles are delicious, and the soup is also delicious. However, the method of cooking the noodles isn't very good, Bufong said calmly. His words were very indifferent, as if he was talking about something very normal. However, the ponytailed lady's face suddenly turned ugly when she heard Bufong's words. This was the first time she realized that someone actually dared to nitpick at the Noodle King restaurant. That's right, nitpicking. Looking at Bufong's behavior, it was obvious that he was nitpicking. He only ate a mouthful of noodles and drank a mouthful of soup, and he already started commenting. If this wasn't nitpicking, then what was it? Customer, your words aren't very good. The fiery rain falling flour noodles that you ordered was personally made by Chef Ouyang. The kneading technique was also Chef Ouyang's technique. How dare you say that the method of cooking the noodles isn't good? Also, customer, what right do you have to say such words? The ponytailed lady's face darkened. She was quite imposing. Bufong gave the lady a sidelong glance in confusion. Does everyone who comes to this noodle restaurant have to say that their noodles are perfect? There's no such thing as a perfect dish in this world. Xiaoyu's face slightly darkened. He looked at the ponytailed lady and said, "This owner Boo is also a person who knows how to cook. If he doesn't have the right to judge, then who does?" The ponytailed lady did not expect Xiao Yu to actually stand up for Bu Fong. It seemed that Xiao Yu had a good relationship with this young man. However, did this kid think that the Noodle King restaurant could not deal with him with Xiao Yu's support? Although Xiao Yu is good. However, he could not even protect himself in this trip to the Valley of Gluttony. Originally, she wanted to remind Xiao Yu and do him a favor. However, now it seemed that she could only let him fend for himself. The ponytailed lady glanced at Xiao Yu, and the fervor in her eyes dissipated a lot. If I'm not wrong, the method of cooking the noodles should be to first pour the cooked broth into the flour to allow the noodles to soak in the flavor, then continue kneading. Although this method is good, it's putting the cart before the horse, Bu Fong said calmly. The ponytailed lady frowned, and the expression on her face became colder. Suddenly, her expression changed. She stood respectfully at the side and looked in the direction of the kitchen. There, a man wearing a chef's robe walked out with a bowl of noodles. The man was quite handsome, and the chef's robe on him was very exquisite, as though it was glowing. The man walked out, and there was still laughter lingering in his mouth. This little friend is right. I have always felt that this method of cooking noodles has some flaws. I have also been improving and developing the method of making noodles. This is the first time someone has brought it up in my Noodle King restaurant. The man pulled a chair over and sat down, looking at Bu Fong with a smile. When the ponytailed lady saw the man, she respectfully took a few steps back. Without a doubt, this man was the first-grade chef of the Noodle King restaurant, Ouyang Chinfeng. Was this the first-grade chef of the Valley of Gluttony? Bu Fong looked at Ouyang Chinfeng, and indeed he felt a different kind of charm from Ouyang Chinfeng. This charm made Bu Fong's heart shiver. Ouyang Chinfeng also looked at Bu Fong, and his face became solemn. He did not know why, but when he saw Bu Fong, he felt a wave of pressure from the latter. Only the monstrous chefs of the Valley of Gluttony could make him feel pressured. Who was this young man in front of him? He only tasted a mouthful of noodles, and he could see the flaw in his noodles. To be honest, the flaw was not big. However, he had always been brooding over it, and he had always wanted to improve this flaw. I wonder if this little friend has any suggestions? Ouyang Chinfeng looked at Bu Fong and asked. The ponytailed lady, who was standing far away, widened her eyes. What? Was Chef Ouyang asking for advice from that young man? How could that young man dare to accept Chef Ouyang's advice? Chef Ouyang was a first-grade chef. A first-grade chef of the Valley of Gluttony. One of the top 10 chefs of the Tablet of Gluttony. Xiao Yu was not surprised at all. Although he had not tasted Bu Fong's dishes for a long time, he believed in his instincts. Owner Bu's culinary skills were definitely not weak. Many people in the surroundings paid attention to them. This noodle restaurant was quite popular, but as soon as Ouyang Chinfeng came out, everyone's attention was focused on him. Hearing Ouyang Chinfeng's words, the others' expressions were similar to the ponytailed lady's. However, many people thought that Chef Ouyang was just being humble. After all, with Chef Ouyang's status, how could he lower himself to ask for advice from a young man? Bu Fong looked at Ouyang Chinfeng, and in the next moment, he actually stood up. Everyone was startled, and then they revealed a meaningful smile. I'm afraid this kid can't hold it anymore. Continue pretending. Does he really think he's a great chef? Look at his chef robe. He's not a chef of the Valley of Gluttony. Who does he think he is? Many people cursed in their hearts. No one knew where this young man came from, but he actually dared to pick a fight with Chef Ouyang. He was simply showing off to the extreme. However, in the next moment, they were all wrong. They realized that they had underestimated this young man. Showing off to the extreme? His pretentiousness was endless. Let's go. Can we use the kitchen? Bu Fong looked at Ouyang Chinfeng, who was sitting on the chair, and asked calmly. Ouyang Chinfeng was obviously still in a daze. After a while, he raised his eyebrows and said in a daze, yes. The ponytailed lady's eyes widened again. What did that young man mean? Did he want to cook the noodles himself? Hiss, hiss. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. This guy really dared to say that. Many people were a little shaken. Did this young man really have culinary skills? Was he really a chef who was better than Chef Ouyang Chinfeng? Impossible. How could a chef from outside the Valley of Gluttony compare to a chef from the Valley of Gluttony? Xiaoyu was quite interested. Was Honorable going to cook personally? Was he going to show his real skills? This was a little interesting. Come, little friend, this way, please. Ouyang Chinfeng came back to his senses and stood up as well. The corners of his mouth slightly curled up. Bufang patted the little girl, Xiaoyu's head, and said calmly, "Wait here. I'll be back soon. Xiaoyu, help me take care of this little girl." Xiaoyu was stunned for a moment, but he nodded his head. In the next moment, Bufang turned around and disappeared from the crowd's sight with Ouyang Chinfeng entering the kitchen. Outside the Noodle King restaurant, a large group of people arrived in a majestic manner. A war chariot rumbled, and a burly figure stood on top of it. This person wore a long golden robe and a golden crown on his head. He had an extraordinary temperament. With his hands behind his back, he slowly walked down from the war chariot and slowly walked toward the Noodle King restaurant. As for his people, they split into two sides and blocked off the surrounding area, preventing the crowd from approaching the Noodle King restaurant. Chapter 652. The clamor outside the noodle house made many people turn their heads to look. Such a grand scene attracted many people's attention. In the Valley of Gluttony, there were not many people who could make such a grand scene. The crowd looked over and saw a figure wearing a long golden robe walking in from outside. This person was tall and sturdy, wearing a pair of dragon leather boots, a golden crown, and a golden robe. He looked noble and magnificent. Just looking at him, the crowd felt their eyes burning. From that person's body, there seemed to be a terrifying aura. Vaguely, the crowd felt that their minds were a little dazed. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Everyone took in a breath of cold air. That's the Heavenly Springs Saint's son, the top existence among the younger generation of the Heavenly Spring Holy Land. Has he come out of seclusion? He actually showed up at this glutton god's banquet. The Heavenly Spring Holy Land's Saint's son. I heard that he has already condensed 5 steps of his soul ladder and is preparing to condense the 6th step. Finally, I see a living saint's son. He looks really scary. The diners in the restaurant felt a wave of fear when they looked at the Heavenly Springs Saint's son. The pressure from this person was too heavy. As soon as he entered the noodle house, the Heavenly Springs Saint's son's eyes turned and fell on Xiaoyu, who was sitting in his seat. His eyes were extremely sharp, like a long sword that could tear the sky. Xiaoyu frowned, his face solemn. He also turned his head to look at the Heavenly Springs Saint's son. The aura between the two seemed to be competing with each other. However, Xiaoyu's aura was much weaker than the Heavenly Springs Saint's son's. It was like the gap between a bright moon and a firefly. However, this was normal. After all, the Heavenly Springs Saint's son was a divine soul realm expert who had condensed 5 steps of his soul ladder. He was the saint's son of the great sage of the hidden dragon royal court. Naturally, he was extraordinary. Although Xiaoyu was also an outstanding figure among the younger generation, his cultivation base was just a divine soul realm expert who had just condensed a soul ladder. Compared to the Heavenly Springs Saint's son, he was naturally much weaker. However, the crowd did not doubt that Xiaoyu absolutely had the chance to grow into a terrifying existence like the Heavenly Springs Saint's son. Buzz, the Heavenly Springs Saint's son, stood there quietly. His aura kept rising, like a huge mountain slowly pressing down on Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu's face was as solemn as water. The crystal sword on his back began to vibrate rapidly. The surging sword will diffuse from Xiaoyu's body, resisting the pressure of the Heavenly Springs Saint's son. Everybody held their breaths, watching the scene as if the Heavenly Springs Saint's son was bullying the young geniuses of the heavens' pivot holy land. All of a sudden, the Heavenly Springs Saint's son raised his hand. His slender palm clenched as he pointed a finger. Xiaoyu's pupils constricted, and his body trembled. The long sword on his back whizzed up, emitting a sword cry and a dazzling sword light. The entire noodle house was filled with raging sword energy. Ding! A finger pressed against the sword. The two of them collided in the air, and the sword chi directly collapsed and shattered under this finger. Xiao Yu's long sword floated in front of him, constantly trembling and incessantly humming. The heavenly springs Saint's son clasped his hands, his eyes arrogant. Everybody felt a chill in their hearts. Was the heavenly springs Saint's son really going to kill the geniuses of the heavens' pivot holy land in the Noodle King restaurant? This might really incite a war between the heavens' pivot holy land and the heavens' pivot holy land. Everybody said that the heavenly springs Saint's son was overbearing. Now that they saw it, he was indeed overbearing. Xiao Yu's heart shuddered. Of course, he wouldn't just sit and wait for his death, so he had to fight back. The heavenly springs Saint's son's attack was beyond his expectations. Or, the heavenly springs Saint's son might have been invited by someone. As for who invited the heavenly springs Saint's son, Xiao Yu knew. Holding the hilt of his sword, Xiao Yu's hair suddenly fluttered, and his eyes became extremely sharp. Still want to resist? The heavenly springs Saint's son squinted his eyes. His fingers turned into a palm, and he slapped at Xiao Yu. The long sword seemed to be bent by the pressure. In the kitchen, Ouyang Chinfeng smiled as he brought Bu Fong into the kitchen. This kitchen was extremely spacious, and it was bustling with people. All kinds of flames shot up to the sky, and all kinds of fragrances assailed one's nostrils. In front of rows of stoves, there were many chefs in chef's robes, cooking in full swing. Bu Fong even saw a second-grade chef among them. Aside from the stoves, there was also a place in the kitchen for making noodles. Flour was flying in the air, and the sound of slapping could be heard continuously. As soon as the two of them entered the kitchen, the chefs respectfully greeted Ouyang Chinfeng. Ouyang Chinfeng smiled and nodded in return and said a few words of encouragement. He didn't have the arrogance of a first-grade chef at all. His calmness slightly surprised Bu Fong. "Little friend, come over here," Ouyang Chinfeng said with a smile. The chefs who were cooking around him were all stunned. What? Was Chef Ouyang going to bring this kid into the kitchen? That was Chef Ouyang's own kitchen. Usually, no one had the chance to enter. Unless Ouyang Chinfeng wanted to teach cooking skills, only his apprentices could enter. Otherwise, no one would have the chance to enter. Now, he actually brought a strange young man into the kitchen. Could it be that this young man was Chef Ouyang's new apprentice? But, from the looks of it, he wasn't. However, someone who knew what Bu Fong had said in the noodle house. Many chefs were stunned, and in the next moment, their eyes widened. What? That little chef actually said he wanted to teach Chef Ouyang how to cook noodles? That guy's too arrogant. Chef Ouyang is a first-grade chef. Where did that kid get the confidence and courage to say something like that? Let's go. Sneak over to see. This little chef is stirring up trouble. Many chef apprentices were whispering to each other, and their faces were filled with righteous indignation. The second-grade chef played with the glass kitchen knife in his hand, his brows furrowed, and his eyes were cold. His respect for Chef Ouyang made him not allow others to insult him like that. That's right. He felt that Bu Fong was insulting him. Thus, a group of people gathered in front of Chef Ouyang's kitchen, poking their heads out, looking into the kitchen. Bu Fong came to Ouyang Chinfeng's kitchen. This kitchen was separated, and all the equipment in this kitchen was much better than the kitchen in front. The most important thing was the exquisite kitchen knife in the middle of the kitchen. That kitchen knife was really exquisite, not like the unique kitchen knife that was incomparably domineering. Instead, it was like a pretty daughter from a humble family, and its blade was almost transparent. This is my exclusive kitchen knife. When I became a first-grade chef, I asked the elders in the valley to forge a kitchen knife for me. It's called the cicada wing knife. Speaking of this kitchen knife, Ouyang Chinfeng was incomparably proud. Seemingly interested, Ouyang Chinfeng hooked his hand, and the kitchen knife fell into his hand. His fingers moved slightly, and the kitchen knife spun in his hand as fast as lightning, almost invisible. The cicada wing knife was as thin as a cicada's wings. Bu Fong was also surprised by this kitchen knife. Compared to the ice soul kitchen knife in his knife cabinet, this cicada wing knife was much more advanced. We've arrived at the kitchen. Let me see my little friend's noodle making, Ouyang Chinfeng said. This time, the smile on his face faded a little. As a first-grade chef, he naturally had the pride of a first-grade chef. Although he also knew that there might be some flaws in his noodle-making process, he had always been looking for these flaws and improving them. However, when Bu Fong brought it up so openly, his heart was still a little uncomfortable. When the people outside saw this scene, they all held their breath. Some even sneered in their hearts. They only thought that this young man was here to show off. Bu Fong glanced at Ouyang Chinfeng, not saying anything. He gently exhaled. A moment later, green smoke curled up from his hand, and suddenly, a slight dragon roar resounded. A black kitchen knife appeared in Bu Fong's hand. Ouyang Chinfeng's eyes shrank. The cicada wing knife in his hand actually trembled the moment Bu Fong's pitch-black kitchen knife appeared. What was going on? Ouyang Chinfeng looked at Bu Fong and the kitchen knife in Bu Fong's hand in bewilderment. Holding the dragon bone kitchen knife horizontally, Bu Fong did not explain anything. Of course, he did not know what to explain. Of course, he could not explain the origin of the dragon bone kitchen knife. He twirled the kitchen knife in his hand, then flicked it in the air, and a bag of flour flew over. The kitchen knife gently flicked. The sack containing the flour was split open, and a shining white flour inside spilled out from it. The unique fragrance of flour diffused, and a wave of fresh spirit energy fluctuated. Good flour. Bu Fong raised his hand. True energy condensed in his hand, continuously sucking the flour into his hand. The white flour floated around his palm, and under the light, it was quite dense. This is the flour made from the Valley of Gluttony's special spirit wheat. Naturally, it is not ordinary, Ouyang Chinfeng explained. He stared at Bu Fong, as if he wanted to see through Bu Fong. However, Bu Fong's body seemed to be covered by a layer of fog, and he could not see through him at all. In the next moment, his eyes shrank, because Bu Fong began to move. Swish! Sparkling water droplets flew out, instantly mixing with the floating flour in Bu Fong's hand. Using water? Ouyang Chinfeng was stunned. When he kneaded the dough, he would always use the juice of spirit herbs or the blood of powerful spirit beasts. That was why the kneaded noodles were filled with unique fluctuations. That way, the noodles would be more flavorful. Bu Fong seemed to understand Ouyang Chinfeng's thoughts. The corners of his mouth rose, and he said, "Water will not cover the unique fragrance of the flour. That fragrance is the most important." Swish! Swish! Bu Fong's hand suddenly retracted. Instantly, with a booming sound, as if there was an explosion, the flour ball suddenly expanded, as if there was an explosion inside. Boom! 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 Bu Fong's mind sank, and his majestic mental energy suddenly surged out. The flour ball exploded continuously, and the booming sound was unceasing. There was a loud bang. That flour ball was violently thrown on the stove by Bu Fong. That violent sound scared everyone, and they were dumbfounded. Ouyang Chinfeng's face was also strange, and he looked at Bu Fong with a strange expression. Are you kneading the dough, or are you throwing it? Do you think that by throwing the dough, you can knead it well? Bu Fong did not care about the strange and doubtful gazes of the crowd. He raised the flour ball in his hand, and once again he threw it. Bang! It violently smashed on the stove. Ouyang Chinfeng looked at Bu Fong's action, and suddenly his face froze. There seemed to be an inconceivable expression in his eyes. Chapter 653. However, after exclaiming, they were a little dumbfounded. The fire in the wok was a normal phenomenon. Ouyang Chinfeng's face slightly froze. Bu Fong looked at the ingredient rack in the distance, which was filled with ingredients. Master Ouyang's eyes shone brightly. Looking at the jade-like dough, he couldn't help but praise. After stir-frying the food in the wok, he lifted the wok and placed it aside. It was as if it was about to explode. Everyone watched in amazement. The others' perception was not as sharp as Ouyang Chinfeng's, so they couldn't see the spiritual energy in the dough. However, when they saw the way Bu Fong operated the dough, they were amazed. This dough kneading is really good. Obviously, I didn't like the way Bu Fong kneaded the dough. It's really hard to believe. With a wave of his hand, the dough instantly spun, and the flour became dense. Hearing that Bufong wanted the left side, Ouyang Chunfeng was stunned. However, in the next moment his eyes shone brightly. The aroma instantly assailed his nostrils, diffusing everywhere. At first, Ouyang Chunfeng didn't care much, but soon his eyes widened because he felt the frightening spiritual energy above the dough. Food ingredients were nothing to Ouyang Chunfeng. In a flash, the rich aroma filled the air. This young man was actually a chef who hid his skills well. Master Ouyang was also stunned, and he smiled awkwardly. Once again, he threw the dough on the stove. At this moment, the dough was overflowing with spiritual energy like a giant piece of jade, shining brilliantly. With a flick of his finger, the dragon bone kitchen knife in Bufong's hand spun, emitting a buzzing sound. In the next moment, he swung the kitchen knife on the chopping board. His familiarity with the kitchen was no less than his. Because to knead such a dough, the failure rate was really too high. This time, Bufong didn't choose to call out the black turtle constellation wok, because he found that there was a good black wok on the stove. With a crack, the spirit beast egg cracked, and the egg yolk and egg white fell into the wok. The last spoonful of boiling beef bone broth was poured in. Boom! They could easily do it themselves. How could he do such an infuriating thing? Bufong extended his slender fingers and gently tapped on the dough. The dough sunk in and slowly bounced up. That warm and soft feeling made Bufong quite satisfied. Holding the kitchen knife horizontally with his 4 fingers, Bufong grasped the rhythm of the kitchen knife and continuously waved it, causing the pieces of dough to fly up and accurately fall into the beef bone soup. The chefs outside the kitchen were chattering with each other. As they watched Bufong's actions, the disdain on their faces grew to the extreme. With a flick of his finger, the flame jumped into the bottom of the wok. The raging flames caused the black wok to heat up. No one knew what Bufong was doing. Was he using a knife to cut noodles? Was he crazy? One must know that this dough was not soaked in any elixir liquid, nor was there any elixir poured into the dough. He was the one who was truly amazed. His original mentality of watching a joke also disappeared. However, he could see the astonishment on Chef Ouyang's face. The rhythmic sound of the kitchen knife colliding with the chopping board resounded in everyone's ears. In the next instant, the ingredients that Bufong had picked were diced. The hot water in the wok was already boiling, constantly bubbling. Is this kid a first-grade chef? A first-grade chef from outside the valley? How terrifying is this kid's cooking talent? The flame soared to the sky. Bufong started another wok. After adding oil, he turned the wok and poured all the diced ingredients into it. As a first-grade chef from the Valley of Gluttony, Ouyang Chunfeng's vision was naturally not ordinary. Bufong turned to look at the others. Many people couldn't help but sniff, exclaiming in admiration. This flame was not very hot. After all, it was not a heaven and earth obsidian flame. At first, he thought that Bufong was just joking around. However, when Bufong really displayed his violent kneading method, he was shocked. How could the noodles made like that have a good texture? Can ingredients be used? Bufong asked. Even Ouyang Chunfeng couldn't help but feel that Bufong was really wasting God's gift. This natural dough was really hard to come by, because they realized that the dishes that this kid cooked were more fragrant than the ones they cooked. The group of chefs at the entrance was already dumbfounded. The dragon bone kitchen knife was not any weaker than the cicada knife in his hand. He really made it into noodles. It's a little similar to the wide noodles I needed, Master Ouyang said. After kneading such noodles, even Bufong wanted to try cooking them. It could even be said that Bufong's cooking experience was more than his. However, before he could continue, Bufong had already made a second cut, because he finally knew where the pressure that Bufong gave him came from. Just from this skillful operation, he knew that this Bufong was definitely an experienced chef. A flame soared up to the sky, and everyone's eyes became a little blurred. Subconsciously, they cried out in surprise. But what was with this majestic fluctuation of spirit energy? Could it be that after falling a few times, the spirit energy in the dough skyrocketed? After getting Ouyang Chunfeng's approval, Bufang's brows instantly twitched. How dare he pick on Master Ouyang with this kind of kneading method that doesn't have any skills? This kid is really arrogant. Bufang's face was calm. He raised the kitchen knife and slammed it down again, cutting the dragon bone kitchen knife piece by piece. Ouyang Chunfeng looked at the dragon bone kitchen knife in Bufang's hand, and his face slightly changed. This kind of kneading method was really the first time he saw this kind of kneading method. This kind of violent kneading method was simply too shocking. Looking at the dough that was like warm jade, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, extremely shocked. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Looking at the large pile of sparkling and translucent noodles flowing out of the ladle, everyone was slightly astonished. He actually kneaded it successfully. At this moment, he found that the others were blankly looking at him. Everyone's eyes were filled with some traces of disbelief and disbelief. Such a naturally formed dough really makes one unable to bear to do it. Little friend, today you really taught me a lesson, Ouyang Chunfeng said. Inside the sieve, a dense mist filled the air, accompanied by abundant spirit energy. Is this guy really cooking? It's like he's simply venting his anger. Clasping his hands, Master Ouyang moved his head closer to look at the warm dough, the corners of his mouth curling up. He picked the ingredients one by one. Skillfully stir-frying, the ingredients in the wok were all coated with a layer of oil, sparkling and beautiful. Moreover, there was also a rich fragrance of the ingredients wafting out. Looking at Bufang's cooking movements, the expression on his face had already changed continuously. His hand gently brushed the front of the dough. That soft touch, that fragrance of flour without any impurities with a twist of his hand. Instantly, a ball of flame burned in his hand. However, there were naturally people who were ignorant, and naturally, there were also people who were clear-headed. The beef bone rolled in the wok, emitting a meaty fragrance. That naturally formed dough was destroyed just like that. Covering the wok and letting the beef bone boil in the black wok, Bufang began to prepare other matters. That dazzling and smooth movement dazzled many people. It turned out that cooking could also be so cool. Basically, there was no sound. The second piece of dough fell into the wok. Instantly, the bone was easily cut. Could it be that the violent kneading technique really worked? Instead of scooping up the beef bone in the wok, Bufang single-handedly held the naturally formed dough. With a turn of the dragon bone kitchen knife, it fell into his hand. What are you doing? Ouyang Chunfeng's eyes shrank. He had never thought that Bufang would actually make such an action. As soon as the beef bone entered the wok, majestic spirit energy gushed out. With a thud, Bufang placed the spirit beast beef bone on the chopping board. With a turn of the kitchen knife, he ruthlessly chopped down. Ouyang Chunfeng murmured. Under the astonished and stunned gazes of the crowd, a piece of dough flew out, accurately falling into the hot wok where the beef bone soup was boiling. Bufang had uncovered the black wok that was stewing the beef bone. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Looking at Bufang's knife technique, he was definitely not an ordinary chef. He gently swung the knife down. Swish! After cutting about half of the dough, Bufang stopped his hand movements. He was sincerely impressed. This dough seemed to be naturally formed. It was hard to imagine that it was actually kneaded with such a violent kneading technique. After finishing all this, Bufang had not finished cooking. The flour was good flour, and the water was also good water. The dough kneaded this way was the best noodle. This is called kneading dough? Then I know how to do it. The wok was boiling with hot water. Looking at Master Ouyang, who was stroking the dough and sighing, Bufang turned his head to look at him and couldn't help but ask. Bufang nodded. A moment later, he came in front of the ingredient rack. Do you want me to make noodles? He placed the dough on the stove. With a sieve, he scooped it into the black wok where the beef bone soup was boiling. Instantly, water splashed everywhere and steam rose. Swish! Swish! The hot water in the wok boiled. In just a blink of an eye, the noodles were swallowed and disappeared. After a long while, Grandmaster Ouyang let out a sigh. His entire person seemed to have aged a little. Even Bu Fong himself found it hard to believe that he was able to knead the dough, which was as natural as nature itself. This kitchen knife is a little interesting. Boom. He took out another wok and poured oil into it. After the oil boiled, Bu Fong single-handedly held a spirit beast egg. Besides a group of third-grade chefs, there was also a second-grade chef. At this moment, that second-grade chef was looking at Bu Fong with a solemn face. He seemed to be unable to see through Bu Fong's kneading technique. That kind of technique could knead dough like this. Feel free to use it. Ouyang Chunfeng was suddenly a little curious about what kind of noodles Bu Fong would cook with this dough. Sure, you can do it. Boom. Da-da-da. The kitchen knife spun, twirling in the air. Bu Fong's face was calm. His vast mental force surged, wrapping around the dough, feeling the change of energy in the dough. He was going to be stabbed 1,000 times. Boom. Taking out a big blue and white porcelain bowl, Bu Fong poured the knife-cut noodles into the wok. Then, he covered the stir-fried ingredients with the noodles. Sizzle. His wrist constantly moved. Every time he moved, the dough would swell up, making a muffled sound. After the muffled sound, it fell on the stove and exploded. With a swishing sound, the beef bones fell into the black wok. Chapter 654. As soon as the spirit beast egg fell into the wok, it sizzled. The oily juice splashed, and smoke rose, bringing with it a thick egg aroma. In just a blink of an eye, it filled the air. Bu Fong held the wok with one hand, letting the egg liquid flow and stagnate in the wok. Soon, the white, shiny egg white became as smooth as a beautiful jade. In the center of the egg white, there was a piece of exquisite yellow gem, which looked like it was inlaid. Bu Fong's expression was indifferent. With a slight shake of his wrist, the poached egg in the wok flew up into the sky with a swoosh. It made a flip in the sky and fell back into the wok with a plop. Everybody was bewildered. Their eyes followed the poached egg as it flew up. Hence, they all raised their heads and lowered their heads. That scene was quite funny. Turning off the fire, Bu Fong shook the wok a bit. Bu Fong flipped the steaming, poached egg over, landing on the knife-shaved noodles. Just when everybody thought that Bu Fong had finished cooking the noodles, Bu Fong took out another ingredient. He found a shrimp-type spirit beast on the ingredient shelf. That shrimp was still spitting bubbles. Bu Fong opened his mouth, spitting out a golden flame. That scorching heat instantly filled the entire kitchen. Chef Ouyang looked at the golden flame in Bu Fong's hand, and he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Is that a heaven and earth obsidian flame? You actually used a heaven and earth obsidian flame to cook? Ouyang Chinfeng was astonished. The heaven and earth obsidian flame was so violet. Although its temperature was high, cooking didn't mean that the higher the temperature, the better it would be. After all, cooking and alchemy had some differences. Bu Fong looked at Ouyang Chinfeng, the corners of his mouth twitching. His mind flickered, and the flame in his hand flourished. The golden light was dazzling, and the unique roar of a beast seemed to come from the flame. Bu Fong put the shrimp-type spirit beasts through the golden flame. In just a blink of an eye, they were cooked. When all the shrimp-type spirit beasts were cooked, Bu Fong extinguished the flame, and with a shake of his hand, the cooked shrimp-type spirit beasts fell on the cooked noodles. Lying quietly on top of the poached egg, the red-hot shrimps emitted the aroma of seafood. Oh, it's done. A bowl of seafood noodles with fried eggs. After finishing this step, Bu Fong finally stopped taking out ingredients. Instead, he wiped off the water stains on his hands and said calmly, "It's over? Finally done? You're finally done." When everyone saw that Bu Fong had finally finished cooking the noodles, they all heaved a sigh of relief. Bu Fong's cooking alone had brought them too many surprises. No wonder Chef Ouyang would invite Bu Fong to cook in this kitchen. His culinary skills were indeed much better than theirs. Just the feeling of proficiency when cooking was not something they could compare with. Try this simple noodle dish. The kneading method is simple and not pretentious. You should be able to taste the difference between this and the noodles you cook, Bu Fong said, looking at Ouyang Chinfeng. He had a good impression of Ouyang Chinfeng. At least this person was not pretentious. He was not like the other chefs of the Valley of Gluttony, who were extremely arrogant and always looked down on others. Hearing Bu Fong's words, Ouyang Chinfeng's face instantly became solemn. He nodded his head. A third-grade chef hurriedly took a pair of clean chopsticks and handed it over. Ouyang Chunfeng took the chopsticks, then his eyes fell on the seafood noodles with fried eggs. He had to admit that this fried egg was really simple. However, just by looking at it, Ouyang Chunfeng felt that this bowl of noodles was filled with magic, constantly stirring up his appetite. This was an unbelievable thing before. Reaching out his chopsticks, he picked up the sparkling, jade-like poached egg and gently took a bite. The egg whites seemed to be bouncy. Once it entered his mouth, the rich egg aroma enveloped his entire mouth. The salty and mild taste massaged Ouyang Chunfeng's taste buds, causing his entire body to involuntarily shiver. This was only a poached egg, but it actually made him feel so amazed. This little chef is really extraordinary. Looking at Bu Fong with a solemn expression, Ouyang Chunfeng continued to eat. This time, he did not eat the seafood shrimp. Instead, he skipped the seafood shrimp and picked up a piece of knife-shaved noodles from a bowl. The knife-shaved noodles were white and smooth, steaming hot. It was like a perfectly round jade, too beautiful to behold. A wave of unique fragrance that belonged to the flour diffused from it, and it blended with the taste of the beef bone soup. For a moment, just looking at it, Master Ouyang could not help but salivate. Gulp! The surrounding chefs looked at the sparkling knife-shaved noodles under the light, and they could not help but swallow their saliva. Everyone's eyes revealed a bit of desire. So fragrant, so beautiful, just looking at it made them want to eat it. After admiring it for a while, Ouyang Chunfeng put the knife-shaved noodles into his mouth. The knife-shaved noodles were not too thick nor too thin, and the texture was just right. Once it entered his mouth, it was as smooth as a loach, almost burrowing into his stomach. That scalding feeling, accompanied by a unique fragrance, made Ouyang Chunfeng, the #1 noodle chef in the Valley of Gluttony, involuntarily squint his eyes. His face revealed a bit of indulgence, and the corners of his mouth slightly curled up. This is the pure fragrance of noodles. It's been a long time since I ate noodles like this. I suddenly missed the feeling when I first came in contact with noodles. At that time, noodles were my sky. I practiced cooking noodles every day and night, and my whole body was enveloped in the fragrance of noodles. That taste, it is this. But now I have long forgotten that taste. This bowl of noodles, it reminds me again. Ouyang Chunfeng slowly opened his eyes, and his eyes were a little moist. Those years of struggle always made people reminisce and feel sentimental. Unknowingly, the knife-shaved noodles in his mouth had already entered his stomach. Ouyang Chunfeng once again used his chopsticks to pick up a piece of knife-shaved noodles and stuffed it into his mouth. That delicious feeling made him unable to extricate himself. After eating a few pieces of knife-shaved noodles, Chef Ouyang once again picked up the poached egg and took a bite. This time, even the egg yolk was bitten. When the egg yolk was bitten, it was instantly like an exquisite piece of art being smashed. In the center of the egg yolk, there was a viscous egg fluid flowing out. That egg fluid should have been 70 to 80% cooked, incomparably smooth, without the slightest fishy smell. That slipperiness in his mouth made Ouyang Chunfeng's eyes widen. He did not think that such a simple fried egg would actually have such a small trick. To cook such a poached egg, it was a test of one's control of the fire. If the fire was not controlled well, the egg fluid would solidify or become too fishy. The fishy smell of the egg fluid was extremely unappetizing. However, Bu Fong's poached egg did not have a fishy smell at all. It was delicious like butter. After eating the poached egg, Ouyang Chunfeng's face revealed an intoxicated expression. He held up that porcelain bowl, with a gulp, and a mouthful of thick noodle soup. In a bowl of noodle soup, besides the noodles, there was also the soup. Both were equally important. This time, Bu Fong used simple beef bone broth to make the noodles. There were no other spirit herbs or ingredients. Would this kind of noodle soup become too monotonous? As the thick soup entered his mouth, the scalding heat flowed through his mouth and down his throat. That taste made Ouyang Chinfeng's entire body shiver. The taste of that thick soup was incomparably rich, with the aroma of the beef bone and the pure taste of the meat broth. Moreover, the taste of the poached egg and the seafood shrimp also blended into the soup. However, that distinct taste made people sink in even more. This soup could only be described with two words. That was delicious. After drinking the soup, Ouyang Chunfeng finally placed his chopsticks on the seafood shrimp. This seafood shrimp cooked with the heaven and earth obsidian flame really made him look forward to it. With a twirl of his chopsticks, he crushed off the head of the prawn and stabbed it straight down. Then, with a pull, the shell of the prawn was immediately peeled off, revealing the red and white prawn meat within. There was even steam slowly drifting above the prawn meat. It was a beautiful sight to behold. Putting the shrimp meat into the noodle soup, he took it out and poured it into his mouth. Boom! Ouyang Chinfeng's eyes widened. He felt as if his body had fallen into the sea in that instant. The turbulent waves rolled over, pounding on his face. Swoosh! That feeling made Ouyang Chinfeng's entire body shiver. It's really delicious. It was hard to believe that this shrimp meat was cooked with the heaven and earth obsidian flame. How could such a violent flame be controlled to cook a dish? Could it be that cooking with the heaven and earth obsidian flame would have a special effect on the dish? Ouyang Chunfeng couldn't help but sink into deep thought. Master Ouyang, could you let your disciple have a taste? Just as Ouyang Chinfeng was deep in thought, the second-grade chef in the noodle house suddenly opened his mouth. His eyes were full of anticipation. Ouyang Chinfeng came back to his senses. He looked at the second-grade chef and sighed. Try it. Try it. I will let you know that there is always someone better than you, Ouyang Chinfeng said. The second-grade chef's eyes suddenly brightened. He took a pair of chopsticks and started to taste the knife-shaved noodles. However, after taking a bite, he was completely stunned. His whole body was rooted to the ground. Ouyang Chinfeng looked at him and sighed softly. He turned to look at Bufong. This time, when he looked at Bufong, Ouyang Chinfeng no longer thought that Bufong was just an arrogant kid. In his heart, he had unknowingly treated Bufong as a chef on the same level as him. The same first-grade chef. It should be known that in the Valley of Gluttony, the status of a first-grade chef was incomparably noble. After all, in the entire Valley of Gluttony, there would not be more than 30 first-grade chefs. Such a young first-grade chef outside the Valley of Gluttony. He was not inferior to the few monsters in the Valley of Gluttony. Youngsters nowadays were really awesome. Ouyang Chinfeng sighed. Bufong, my little friend, please take a seat outside the restaurant. This time, I have seen your noodle cooking, and I have really benefited a lot. This time, the dishes will be on me, my little friend, Ouyang Chinfeng said with a smile. Bufong was stunned, but he nodded. The two of them turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading toward the shop. However, when the two of them reached the shop, they felt that the atmosphere was not right. The pressure was spreading, and the sword energy was crisscrossing. What was going on? Ouyang Chinfeng's face instantly darkened. Someone was causing trouble in a shop. Chapter 655. Xiao Yu's entire body started to swell up as sword intent unceasingly gushed out from his body. The long sword in his hand blossomed with rays of light due to the sword light. It was incomparably resplendent. However, the surrounding people didn't even dare to breathe loudly. No one dared to stand out and defend Xiao Yu. It was because the person who wanted to deal with Xiao Yu was the Heavenly Springs Saint Sun. The Heavenly Spring Holy Land Saint Sun had an incomparably high status, and his cultivation was peerless. No one knew why the Heavenly Springs Saint Sun wanted to deal with Xiao Yu. Even Xiao Yu himself didn't understand. Boom! The Heavenly Springs Saint Sun pressed his palm down, and suddenly, the air let out a slight roar. Xiao Yu felt the hand holding the sword tremble, as if he couldn't hold the sword steadily. However, Xiao Yu only frowned. Ever since he, Xiao Yu, left the light wind empire, and was taken in as a disciple by an elder of the heaven's pivot holy ground. He displayed an extremely high talent, and his cultivation rose rapidly. He had long become a top genius of the heavens' pivot holy ground, and even the saint son of the heavens' pivot holy ground had to be wary of him. The heavenly springs saint son and the heavens pivot saint son had always been on good terms. Did the heavenly springs saint son help the heavens pivot saint son? Did he want to get rid of him? But wasn't this too blatant? Xiao Yu's eyes were ice cold. His gaze was as sharp as the edge of a sword. Suddenly, the heavenly springs saint son was bewildered. His eyes moved and fell on the shadows walking out of the kitchen. The heavenly springs saint son is so impressive. Our noodle house is a small business. If your highness wants to show off, can we go out? With his hands clasped behind his back, Ouyang Chunfeng walked out with a grave expression. With every step he took, the aura on his body rose by a few notches. As a first-grade chef of the Valley of Gluttony, Ouyang Chunfeng was very strong. Very strong. Even when facing the heavenly springs saint son, he was not afraid. Although he was a little fearful, the other party was a saint after all. He still had to show some fear. As soon as Ouyang Chunfeng's aura joined in, the three auras collided with each other. Xiao Yu felt the pressure on his body loosen, and his face trembled slightly. "Oh, Chef Ouyang, long time no see. I really miss your heaven burial noodles." The heavenly springs saint son slowly turned his head. His eyes fell on Ouyang Chunfeng as he spoke faintly. His eyes were still as arrogant as before, but compared to when he looked at Xiao Yu, they were much more gentle. After all, he was a first-grade chef of the Valley of Gluttony. Although the Valley of Gluttony was a vassal force of the Hidden Dragon Royal Court, its overall strength wasn't weaker than any of the Holy Lands. After all, it was the holy land of chefs in the entire Hidden Dragon continent. The mysterious Valley Master of the Valley of Gluttony was an existence that even the great sage Saint Sovereigns were afraid of. In the Valley of Gluttony, a first-grade chef status was already very respectable. I don't dare. If the heavenly spring Saint Sun wants to eat it, I can cook it now. Anyway, the preparation process of the heaven burial noodles is complicated, and the cooking process is even harder. Perhaps the heavenly springs Saint Sun is impatient. Ouyang Chunfeng clasped his hands. His chef robe stuck to his body under the pressure of the heavenly springs Saint Sun. Hearing Ouyang Chunfeng's words, the heavenly springs Saint Sun exhaled. He actually raised a hand. Everyone's heart clenched. The heavenly springs Saint Sun wanted to take action. Did he dare to do that? This place was the Valley of Gluttony. The heavenly springs Saint Sun was here to attend the glutton god's banquet. If he killed a first-grade chef of the Valley of Gluttony, how could he attend the glutton god's banquet? Everybody didn't understand, but the heavenly springs Saint Sun didn't seem to be afraid. That crystal-clear palm was still aimed at Ouyang Chunfeng. It seemed he had made up his mind to kill Ouyang Chunfeng, who dared to stop him. Ouyang Chunfeng's heart tightened. He didn't think that the heavenly springs Saint Sun would dare to press him. These Saint Suns and Saintesses were getting more and more lawless in the Valley of Gluttony. Did they think that the Valley of Gluttony's master had disappeared for a long time, so they could bully the Valley of Gluttony? However, when the heavenly springs Saint Sun was about to bid for it, a burst of laughter came from outside the door. The stagnant air seemed to explode with this laughter. Everyone felt the heavy feeling that had enveloped their hearts disappear. Who was it? The crowd looked out and saw a group of people slowly approaching. The one in the lead was a man wearing a loose robe. The man's face wasn't very handsome, but the aura he exuded was incomparably terrifying. As he walked, his entire body seemed to be trembling. It's the heavens pivot's Saint Sun. Why is he here? Someone recognized the identity of the person who had just appeared. Instantly, their faces became strange. The heavenly springs Saint Sun was dealing with the top genius of the heavens pivot holy ground, and the heavens pivot Saint Sun had appeared in the next moment. There seemed to be a strange connection between them. The heavenly springs Saint Sun glanced at the heavens pivots Saint Sun. Oh, it's brotherly inching. What a coincidence. The heavenly springs Saint Sun retracted his aura and cupped his hands at the heavens pivot's saint's son, who was striding toward him. The heavens pivot's saint's son, Lianxing, also cupped his hands. It seemed that the two of them were quite familiar with each other. Since brother Lianxing has appeared, I will give you face and forgive you, a kid who dared to offend me, the heavenly springs saint's son said calmly. Then he stepped into the restaurant, leading a group of people inside. When the heavenly springs saint's son passed by Xiao Yu, his eyes slanted and the corners of his mouth curled up in disdain. All of a sudden, the heavenly springs saint's son squinted. His eyes fell on the timid little girl, Xiaoya, and he couldn't help but frown. He stared at Xiaoya, and there seemed to be light moving in his eyes. Xiaoya's body seemed to be covered by a layer of black mist. This little girl is a little strange, the heavenly springs saint's son said faintly. Then he reached out his hand to grab Xiaoya. Seeing that, Xiao Yu's mind shivered. With a swishing sound, the long sword on his back swayed and fell into his hand. The sword light moved, slashing toward the heavenly springs saint's son like a dragon. Stop, Xiao Yu said in a hoarse voice. Buzz, however, Xiao Yu's figure was quickly blocked. He was blocked by the two maids behind the heavenly springs saint's son. The two maids held thin swords in their hands, and their surging cultivation pressed toward Xiao Yu, blocking his figure. The heavenly springs saint's son didn't stop. His palm continued to grab the little girl. Pa! All of a sudden, a white and slender hand grabbed the heavenly springs saint's son's palm. There were still some water stains on her fair palms. The heavenly springs saint's son's movement froze. He slowly lifted his head and saw an emotionless face. That face seemed to be somewhat familiar. You dare to stop me, the saint's son? Who do you think you are? The heavenly springs saint's son said faintly. Bufang glanced at the heavenly springs saint's son, and with his other hand, he patted Xiao Ya's head, making the latter hide behind him. You bullied a child, and you still have the face to call yourself the saint's son? Bufang said faintly. It was a loud bang. Bufang's hand, which was holding the heavenly springs saint's son's hand, was instantly released. The heavenly springs saint's son squinted, looking at Bufang. You have guts. Unfortunately, you're not qualified to talk to me like that. The heavenly springs saint's son clasped his hands behind his back, indifferently glancing at Bufang. The corners of his mouth twitched, and he didn't bother to pay attention to him. He continued to walk toward the restaurant. Bufang watched the heavenly springs saint's son enter the restaurant. His eyes were indifferent, and his face was emotionless. He patted the little girl's head, exhaling gently. Ouyang Chinfeng walked over. He glanced at Bufang, frowning. My little friend, leave quickly. You've offended the heavenly springs saint's son, and you're in danger. Why don't you stay in my noodle house? Although the heavenly springs saint's son is arrogant, he might not dare to kill people in my noodle house, Ouyang Chinfeng said seriously. The heavenly springs saint's son would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Those who offended him basically didn't have a good ending. He had 3 maids with strong cultivation. They were the heavenly springs saint's son's 3 blades. Their attacks were ruthless, and they had killed countless people. Xiao Yu was entangled by 2 of the maids. No need, it's okay. Bufang glanced at the heavenly springs saint's son, who had found a seat. He pulled Xiaoya, turned around, and walked out of the Noodle King restaurant. Could Ouyang Chunfeng's noodle house really stop the heavenly springs saint's son, who was determined to kill them? Judging from the situation, it was hard to say. It wasn't that Bufang looked down on Ouyang Chinfeng, but there seemed to be something terrible inside Xiaoya's body. Once it exploded, it would be hard to control. So Bufang chose to leave. If the heavenly springs saint's son really sent people to kill them, then he would kill them. Bufang exhaled softly and walked out of the Noodle King restaurant. The guards outside the door stood on both sides, looking at Bufang and Xiaoya, who were walking out. Bufang glanced at them, but didn't say anything. He blended into the street and disappeared with the flow of people. Clatter, clatter, a graceful figure walked out from within. When the guards saw this figure, they all bowed respectfully. It was a woman, wearing a jade green dress. Her figure was hot and swaying. She looked at the direction in which Bufong had left, and a cold smile appeared on her face. You want to leave after offending the saint's son? You're really young. With a swoosh, the woman's figure turned into a green light and disappeared. Xiaoyu glanced at the heavens pivot saint's son, who was smiling warmly. Junior brother Yu, the Valley of Gluttony, is holding the Glutton God's banquet. The great elder asked you to come to give you a chance to learn. You shouldn't offend people so easily. There are many people here that you can't afford to offend. I'm giving you some advice out of goodwill, so you should listen carefully. The heavens pivot saint's son patted Xiaoyu's shoulder, as if he was trying to persuade him. Xiaoyu sneered, shook his shoulder, and shook off the heavens pivot saint's son's hand. He turned around and walked out of the Noodle King restaurant. The Heavenly Springs saint's son found trouble with him for no reason the moment he entered the restaurant. Even if he used his toes to guess, he would know that it was Lianxing's doing. Because Lianxing was jealous of his talent, he was worried that he would take away his position as the saint's son. He had really tried his best. Walking out of the Noodle King restaurant, Xiaoyu walked toward the residence that the Valley of Gluttony had prepared for him. As an expert invited by the Valley of Gluttony, he naturally had a residence in the Valley of Gluttony. However, as he slowly walked forward, the clamor around him gradually disappeared. The originally bright sky also gradually darkened. The chilly wind whistled, blowing past, rolling up the fallen leaves on the ground, and they slowly drifted away. Xiaoyu stopped in his tracks. His entire aura suddenly became sharp. His eyes turned, and he looked into the distance like a dragon. Pitter-patter, dark clouds came, and rain fell. When the raindrops hit the ground, they broke and splashed. The entire atmosphere suddenly changed. The buzzing sound of swords resounded, and the raindrops in the sky seemed to have turned into sharp swords, sweeping and cutting. Chapter 656. Bufong brought Xiaoyu along as they walked on the street. A light drizzle began to fall from the sky. This rain was extremely sudden and strange. The air in the entire street seemed to have turned ice cold at this moment. It was extremely bone-piercing. Stepping on the bricks on the ground, Bufong's footsteps halted. Xiaoyu followed closely beside Bufong, looking around in fear. The rain fell faster and faster, splashing on the ground. In the next moment, a graceful figure slowly appeared in the distance. She wore a long green dress with a slit on her thighs, causing her hazy and fair thighs to be faintly discernible. It was extremely eye-catching. Her long hair spread out and fluttered in the wind. Her body emitted a sparkling brilliance, causing the rainwater to bounce away the instant it fell. The woman's luscious red lips curled up slightly to reveal an arc. There seemed to be a hint of playfulness and disdain in her eyes, and it was fully expressed when her red lips curled up. The woman wore a pair of light green boots that covered half of her lower legs. The remaining skin was smooth and full of enchanting luster. She held a thin sword in her hand. The blade of the thin sword trembled slightly, as if it was making a soundless sword cry. The woman's long eyelashes fluttered, looking at Bufong, who was in the middle of the long street. You offended His Highness, and you still want to leave? The woman said softly. Her voice was soft and charming, as if she was breathing into his ears. Bufong furrowed his brows and indifferently looked at the woman. The Heavenly Springs saint's son had sent someone to take action. He was indeed a person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Anyway, let them come. Since they were here, he would kill them. Bufong gently exhaled. Green smoke twirled around his hand. In the next moment, the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in his hand, and true energy poured into it. A dragon roar reverberated in the sky, deafening. The pitch-black dragon bone kitchen knife instantly turned into a golden kitchen knife, which he carried on his shoulder. Xiaoyu stood behind Bufong, timidly watching the scene. At this moment, the atmosphere suddenly became intense and austere. When Lu Ji saw Bufong's actions, the curve of her red lips suddenly became bigger, and she couldn't help but cover her mouth and laugh. You little brat, you're really interesting. You're actually thinking of resisting. Is there any meaning in that? With the strength of someone who has broken through one of the Supreme Being's shackles, you still want to escape from me? This woman's cultivation was very strong. Although she was inferior to the Saint's son, she was still a powerhouse at the Divine Soul realm, so she was naturally extraordinary. Although Bufong felt that it was a little tricky, he was not afraid. Although this woman was strong, he also had his own methods. As if she felt that she had talked too much with Bufong, the lady in the green dress gently swung her thin sword. Her waist swayed as if she was dancing. Suddenly, the woman stepped on the ground. Crash! The rainwater on the ground was immediately separated from the two sides. The woman was extremely fast, and in an instant, she sped away. Her long hair fluttered, and her eyes, which were filled with killing intent, suddenly locked onto Bufong's body. This woman's sword had already appeared in front of Bufong. Bufong still carried the dragon bone kitchen knife, looking at the thin sword that was continuously enlarging in his eyes. His eyes did not even blink. That calm and expressionless appearance suddenly made Lu Ji's heart feel a little uneasy. How could she feel uneasy? Even Lu Ji herself felt that it was a little absurd. With her strength, killing this divine physique echelon realm and in front of her should be very easy. However, Bufong's appearance was really too calm. It was as if victory was already in his hands, and he had a well-thought-out plan. That appearance, it was as if he was going to eat her. Could it be that this brat really had some tricks up his sleeves? Buzz, the thin sword swayed, and the body of the sword started to sway, causing the falling raindrops to fly away. Lu Ji's figure instantly retreated rapidly, looking at Bufong with extreme vigilance. Do you have any tricks up your sleeves? Lu Ji lifted the thin sword. Her red lips slightly parted, and her bright red tongue stretched out, slowly licking the blade of the long sword. That appearance was filled with charm. Bufong quietly watched, holding the dragon bone kitchen knife with one hand, letting the raindrops fall on his body. The vermilion robe slightly fluttered, emitting a wave of fluctuation, causing the raindrops to evaporate before they could even get close. You guess, Bufong opened his mouth and said. Guess. Lu Ji's eyes surged with killing intent. What was the point of guessing? Just kill him. Anyone who offended His Highness Saint's son must die. No matter what tricks you have up your sleeves, I will break them with force. Lu Ji's slender and beautiful legs once again stretched out. Her feet stepped on the ground, causing the rainwater to split apart. A terrifying killing intent condensed, and the sword intent surged violently. It was as if it had condensed into an invisible giant sword, slashing toward Bufong. Rip! The air seemed to be cut apart by this sword. Bufong furrowed his brows. That tyrannical sword energy spread out, causing the hair on his forehead to flutter. Gently exhaling a breath of air, Bufong tilted his head, looking at Lu Ji as if he was looking at an idiot. The true energy in his hand dissipated, and the dragon bone kitchen knife's radiant golden light instantly disappeared, returning to its simple, pitch-black appearance. Bufong twirled the knife, and the dragon bone kitchen knife instantly disappeared. Pretending to be mysterious. Do you think this lore will believe you? Die. Lu Ji's red lips parted, and a mocking look flashed past her beautiful eyes. The sword stabbed toward Bufong, and the sky was filled with sword light. Xiaoya hid behind Bufong. As the sword light approached, she tightly grabbed onto Bufong's clothes, closing her eyes. Boom! The entire world seemed to shake, and the dark clouds in the sky seemed to be scattered. The long street was silent, and only the sound of spitting blood could be heard. Lu Ji's long sword shattered, and her entire body lay on the ground. Her eyes revealed a look of fear as she looked at the white-haired, white-browed old man who had appeared out of nowhere. The old man clasped his hands, and his loose robe fluttered even though there was no wind. He looked somewhat like an immortal. His indifferent gaze swept over the girl on the ground, and he slowly raised his palm. You can't kill me. I'm the Heavenly Springs Saint's son's maid. I'm the Heavenly Springs Saint Sun's woman. Lu Ji sensed the extremely frightening energy and pressure from the old man's body. Her heart trembled as she roared in fear. Heavenly Springs, Saint Sun? What's that? The old man calmly said. Lu Ji's eyes instantly froze. In the next instant, the old man's palm swung down. Boom! It was as if an invisible wave instantly spread out. Lu Ji's hair fluttered, and the divine light in her eyes faded. In just a short while, her life was gone. The personal maid of the Heavenly Springs, Saint Sun, was dead. After killing this girl, the old man looked as if he had killed an insignificant fly. He turned his head to look at Bufong and Xiaoya. His gaze fell on Bufong. It was slightly indifferent, but when it fell on Xiaoya, it became gentle. The Glutton God's banquet is around the corner. Right now, the Glutton God City is in constant conflict. Many saints of the Hidden Dragon Royal Court have appeared, and a storm is brewing. I asked you to take care of this girl, not to cause trouble, the old man said. Bufong calmly looked at the old man. He seemed to have guessed that the old man would make a move, and the corners of his mouth twitched. His gaze was full of deep meaning as he lightly said, Got it. If I don't cause trouble, others shouldn't provoke me either. Bufong brought Xiaoyu away, and their figures gradually disappeared into the curtain of rain. The old man clasped his hands, looking at the disappearing figures of Bufong and Xiaoya. His face was solemn, and no one knew what he was thinking. Noodle King Restaurant, the Heavenly Springs Saint Sun slowly raised a bowl of steaming hot noodles. The soup of the noodle dish had a glossy luster. It was beautiful, and the rich fragrance was rolling, attracting people's appetites. He brought the bowl in front of him, preparing to take a sip of the soup. However, before he could drink it, his figure slightly trembled. His eyes widened, and a trace of sorrow instantly spread out from the bottom of his eyes. The two maids standing quietly behind him were stunned for a moment. Lu Ji is dead. Holding the bowl, the Heavenly Springs Saint Sun said sorrowfully. There seemed to be a trace of pain on his face. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. Lu Ji, this Saint Sun will definitely take revenge for you, the Heavenly Springs Saint Sun said. In the next moment, he took a sip of the steaming hot soup. The two maids behind the Saint Sun had faces full of disbelief. How could it be? Lu Ji went to kill a divine physique echelon ant. How could she be killed instead? Could it be that something had happened? How could this divine physique echelon ant dare to kill the people of the Heavenly Spring Holy Land? Damn it! In an instant, the two saintesses' faces were filled with murderous intent. If they saw that chef, they would kill him without a doubt. As the raindrops fell on the ground, they instantly splashed. The pervasive sword energy split the raindrops, rushing out with sharpness. The long sword on Xiaoyu's back bust. In the next moment, it soared into the sky, turning into a flowing sword light, cutting the sword energy. His eyes were incomparably sharp. The sword energy crisscrossed around his body, and the long sword floated above his head. Beneath the ground, many figures floated up, bringing with them a murderous aura and sword chi. The 6 great slaughtering swordsmen under Lianqing. Xiaoyu indifferently glanced at the 6 figures rising from the ground, saying indifferently, on the second floor of a restaurant in the distance. Lianqing's face was filled with a gentle smile. He poured the cool wine into his cup, looking at the hazy, rainy scenery, and lightly drank a cup. Good wine, Lianqing praised. Good wine, good scenery, good things happen. Kill. Buzz, Xiaoyu's eyes shot out, looking straight at Lianqing on the second floor of the restaurant. His face was incomparably cold. The sword energy of the 6 swordsmen burst out at the same time. The sharp sword energy almost tore Xiaoyu apart. Ding, ding, ding. The sound of the long swords colliding resounded unceasingly. The sword light circulated, and the sword energy swept out. The battle broke out in an instant. On the long street, there were very few figures. Only the sound of the battle could be heard. Facing the siege of 6 powerful swordsmen, that well-coordinated killing method made Xiaoyu feel apprehensive, as if he was going to be killed in the next moment. He thought that Lianqing would make a move against him, but he didn't think that his method would be so fierce. He directly sent out the 6 strongest swordsmen under him. This was sending him, Xiao Yu, to his death. With a wave of his sword finger, the long sword above his head instantly turned into countless sword shadows. With a whistling sound, the sword light swept out, colliding with the sword energy of the 6 swordsmen. A huge explosion occurred, and a terrifying fluctuation rumbled. The rain in the sky was getting heavier and heavier. It fell with a crashing sound, washing over Xiao Yu's figure. He held the sword with one hand, kneeling on the ground with one knee. His body was covered with numerous wounds, and the sword energy was surging from the wounds. He raised his head, and the sharp energy in his eyes didn't retreat. He was still persevering. Even if he was besieged by the 6 swordsmen, he still didn't choose to escape. A swordsman should advance courageously. Lianxing tasted the good wine, smiling as he looked at the battle. Looking at Xiao Yu's body covered with sword wounds and dripping with blood, the corners of his mouth suddenly curled up. He was in a good mood. Suddenly, in the curtain of rain, 2 figures slowly came from afar. Those 2 people were holding umbrellas. The rainwater hit them, splashing and making crashing sounds. Xiao Yu gently coughed out a mouthful of blood, turning his head to look at the position of the person holding the umbrella. He seemed to be stunned, but in the next instant, the corners of his mouth opened. "Owner Boo, give me a bowl of noodles." Chapter 657. Owner Boo, can you give me a bowl of noodles? When Xiao Yu said those words, he had a smile on his face. He really did not think that Bu Fong would appear at this time. Although Bu Fong's appearance was useless in terms of strength, Xiao Yu was an acquaintance of the Light Wind Empire, so how could he understand Bu Fong according to common sense? Owner Bu was a person who created miracles. His strength could not be judged by just looking at his appearance. Hence, Xiao Yu opened his mouth. He remembered that Bu Fong had a rampage ramen. The rampage ramen was enough to let his cultivation level erupt once again, increasing his strength by a lot. It might be the key to this counterattack. The rain continued to fall, and it became more and more intense. The pitter-patter of rainwater smashed onto the oil paper umbrella, as if it was going to topple it. However, the hand holding the umbrella was so strong that even under the bombardment of the rain, the oil paper umbrella was still as firm as a rock. Bu Fong slowly walked with Xiao Yu. He saw Xiao Yu, who was covered in blood and was battered by the rain. He saw the 6 people holding swords around Xiao Yu. He also felt the incomparably sharp sword aura that filled the air. The sword aura caused goosebumps to appear on his skin. However, he did not retreat, nor did he take Xiao Yu to take a detour. Instead, he continued to walk forward slowly, his feet stepping on the wet ground. Xiao Yu followed him step by step. Ever since this little girl met Bu Fong, the things that she experienced made her a little confused. Xiao Yu's words shocked everyone. The 6 swordsmen narrowed their eyes, and they looked at Bu Fong's position with great attraction. Soon, Bu Fong fell into their line of sight, and his weak aura was exposed. Instantly, the 6 swordsmen felt strange. Was this Xiao Yu desperate? He pulled someone over and treated it as a life-saving straw. This person's aura was so weak, and he was only at the divine physique echelon realm. How could he save him? And eat noodles? At this time, when he was on the verge of death, this Xiao Yu actually wanted to eat noodles? How could such a person be a top genius of our heaven's pivot sacred ground? How could it be in existence that even the heaven's pivot saint was so fearful of? Was he here to be funny? The 6 swordsmen looked at each other. Their faces were filled with confusion and mockery. The restaurant on the 2nd floor. Lianxing was also holding his wine cup and drinking. He also saw Bu Fong and recognized Bu Fong. He was the young man who dared to challenge the Heavenly Springs Saint's son in the Noodle King restaurant. Suddenly, a sneer appeared on Lianxing's face. Has Xiao Yu given up all hope, breaking a broken jar, looking for a dying person as a life-saving straw? He can't even save himself, so how can he save you? This time, Xiao Yu, you will die. The corner of Lianxing's mouth lifted, revealing a smile. He tightened his grip on the glass. With a cracking sound, the wine glass broke into pieces. The flying fragments turned into powder and mixed with the wine in the glass, becoming a little turbid. The wine and the glass turned into a ball of water. Liansheng flicked his finger, and the water ball instantly shot toward the air, exploding in the air. This was like a signal, causing the 6 swordsmen, who were in a daze, to come back to their senses. Their sword intent instantly exploded. The 6 people once again charged toward Xiaoyu. And that young man, according to the Saint Sun's order, he was also to kill without mercy. Since the Saint Sun wanted him to die, then let him die. Splash. Water splashed. Bufang stopped in his tracks. His face was calm as he looked at the 6 people charging toward Xiaoyu. The rain that filled the sky collapsed under the sword energy of the 6 people, causing water vapor to fill the surroundings, making it hazy. Xiaoyu, hold the umbrella. Don't get wet. Bufang handed the oil paper umbrella to Xiaoyu. The latter hugged the umbrella with both hands and retreated a few steps, staring at Bufang. As soon as the umbrella was taken out, the rain fell on his body. However, the vermilion robe on Bufang's body fluttered even though there was no wind. An invisible force swayed, isolating the rain. A bowl of noodles, right? I'll make it for you now, Bufang calmly said. After Xiaoyu heard it, he immediately laughed. The long sword in his hand buzzed, and there was actually an additional force. With a sweep of the sword whistled. Then I'll wait. The 6 people were startled by Xiaoyu's sudden burst of confidence. They all retreated a few steps. Green smoke curled up from Bufang's hand, and a black tortoise walk appeared. It was heavy and simple, as if it carried a terrifying pressure. Liansheng, who was in the restaurant on the 2nd floor, narrowed his eyes. What did this young man want to do? He actually took out a wok. Was he really going to make noodles? The 6 swordsmen were also a little puzzled. However, they didn't care. Their goal was to kill Xiaoyu. If Xiaoyu didn't die, once they returned to the heavens' pivot holy ground, they would be miserable. Xiaoyu's talent was too shocking. If he was given enough time to grow, they would definitely be toyed with to death. In reality, ever since Xiaoyu entered the heavens' pivot holy ground, his means of growth had already caused many people to be bitterly disappointed. Since they had already made a move against Xiaoyu, they couldn't show the slightest bit of mercy. They had to kill them all. 6 rays of sword light instantly burst forth and revolved in the sky. It was as if they had transformed into a long dragon, surging forth with a roar. Xiaoyu held the sword with one hand. His hair, which was dripping with rain, stuck to his face. However, his gaze was incomparably sharp, and his killing intent was unstoppable. Holding the sword with both hands, he slashed out. It collided with the sword dragon formed by the 6 rays of sword energy. Xiaoyu's entire body was sent flying. The wounds on his body opened up and blood spurted out. He also spurted out a mouthful of blood. He staggered back a few steps and used the long sword to prop himself up. Only then did he stabilize his figure. The 6 swordsmen's expressions were also turbulent, and blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. In this collision, both sides were injured. However, they knew that Xiaoyu had already exhausted his limited abilities. If he attacked again, he would definitely be killed. Xiaoyu, on the other hand, ignored them and turned his head toward Bufang. Bufang opened his mouth and spat out a golden flame. That flame was like a surging fire dragon. Steam rose up and evaporated the rainwater in an instant, turning it into a hazy mist. A misty mist rose up and spread out, covering the surroundings. Buzz, the flames darted out and drilled into the bottom of the black turtle constellation walk. With a thought, Bufang took out a bag of heavenly mountain spirit spring water from the system's dimensional bag. It poured into the black turtle constellation walk. The heat of the heaven and earth obsidian flame caused the heaven Alps spirit spring water in the black turtle constellation walk to boil. Bufang's face was expressionless. With a wave of his hand, strands of noodles that looked like thin threads flew up, fluttering around his body like silk. It was too beautiful to behold, attracting people's gazes. With a swishing sound, the noodles fell into the black turtle constellation walk, and were swallowed by the boiling Heaven Alps spirit spring water. Gulp! Steam rose up like a long dragon. It spun in the sky and soared into the sky, attracting many people's gazes. The 6 swordsmen were dumbfounded. This guy really cooked noodles on the spot? But was it necessary? What could a bowl of noodles save? Even a bowl of noodles from Noodle King Restaurant's first-grade chef, Ouyang Chinfeng, would not be able to save Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu had to die, and the youth cooking the noodles had to die as well. Lianqing looked at the gradually hazy scene and couldn't help but reveal a mocking smile. He's really young. In the next instant, his eyes flickered with brilliance, as if there was a silver light circulating in them. The white mist in front of him dispersed, and he could see the scene clearly. Swish! A blue and white porcelain bowl flew out and floated above Bu Fang's palm. Bu Fang looked at the few people in the distance and reached out his hand to pat the wok. Instantly, the black turtle constellation wok exploded. The shining white noodles flew out and fell into the bowl. He scooped a spoonful of abyssal chili sauce into it, causing the noodle soup to melt. Instantly, a bowl of steaming hot rampage ramen was completed. With a thought, a fragrant beef meatball flew out from the system's dimensional storage. That beef meatball had a brilliance circulating within it. The golden dragon bone kitchen knife appeared. With a twist of the knife, Bu Fang sliced the vigor beef meatball into 2 halves, causing the oily juice within to splash onto the ramen. Bu Fang then steadily landed on top of the ramen. With a buzzing sound, the black turtle constellation wok and the dragon bone kitchen knife disappeared. The blue and white porcelain bowl steadily fell into Bu Fang's hand. A warm feeling was transmitted from the bowl to Bu Fang's palm. The fragrant, vigorous beef meatball ramen was completed. Xiao Yu smelled the fragrance that permeated the air, and an expression of reminiscence appeared on his exhausted face. Even though the fragrance was washed away by the rainwater, he was still extremely intoxicated. The noodles you wanted are done. The vermilion robe shook, sweeping away the rainwater. Bu Fang flicked his finger and flicked the wall of the blue and white porcelain bowl, causing it to fly toward Xiao Yu. What was so special about a bowl of noodles? Looking at the rampage ramen, which didn't seem to have anything special about it, the 6 swordsmen looked at each other in dismay. On the second floor of the restaurant, Lianqing's silver eyes swept around. Under his spirit eyes, that bowl of rampage ramen emitted an astonishing amount of spirit energy. That spirit energy circulated in an orderly manner, as though it had condensed into a magic array. That magic array was extremely mysterious, and he was actually unable to see through it in a short period of time. However, there was no doubt that this bowl of noodles was absolutely extraordinary. No, it wasn't just extraordinary. No wonder Xiao Yu wants such a bowl of noodles. If the spirit energy gathered by the magic array was absorbed by Xiao Yu, the strength he would burst forth would definitely be extremely terrifying. Lianqing's hand slammed on the dining table, and a long sword that hadn't been unsheathed immediately whizzed out from behind his back. On the blade of the sword, a sword light burst forth, and a dense amount of sword energy circulated. It was like a sword-intense sun as it flew toward Xiao Yu. "Kill him. Don't let him touch it," Lianqing coldly said, his voice rumbling out. The hearts of the 6 swordsmen instantly shivered, and each of their eyes revealed an astonished expression. However, in the next instant, the sword intent circulated, and they all burst forth, charging toward Xiao Yu to kill him. The entire scene had become extremely strange. Xiao Yu stood on the spot. On his left was a bowl of rampage ramen, which was swaying and emitting hot air, while on his right was a sword-intent sun with a tyrannical aura. The sword light soared into the sky, and there were 6 swordsmen charging toward him. The contrast between the 2 sides was intense, and it was beyond anyone's imagination. Both sides seemed to be in a hurry. Xiao Yu leaned on his sword and stood on the spot. He turned his head to look at the rampage ramen that was floating over, and his face instantly revealed a smile. He didn't care about the sword intent of Lianqing, which was gradually approaching, and the killing intent of the 6 swordsmen. Xiaoyu straightened his waist, stretched out his hand, and grabbed the blue and white porcelain bowl. Holding the bowl, he faced the sword intent that was like a small sun, which was wreaking havoc, and the 6 swordsmen surrounding the sword intent. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he poured the rampage ramen into his mouth. In the next instant, the sun's sword intent rumbled, covering the place where he was standing. The sword energy of the 6 swordsmen also soared into the sky, and they suddenly slashed down. Bufang gently exhaled, and he clapped his hands. After shaking off the water stains on his hands, he slowly walked in front of Xiaoyu, took the umbrella from her hands, and opened it. The rainwater splashed onto the oil paper umbrella. Bufang indifferently looked into the distance, and the corners of his mouth curled up. A bowl of ramen, and I'll give you a beef meatball. This should be enough. Chapter 658. Rumble. The curtain of rain seemed to be completely torn apart. The wind howled, accompanied by the sharp sword energy cutting the surroundings. Even the air was cut with a swishing sound. The dark clouds in the sky scattered, and the rain became pitter-patter. The dazzling sword intent, like the sun, smashed on the ground, completely swallowing Xiaoyu. The clanging sword intents collided with each other, creating an explosion. The rumbling sound resounded unceasingly. 6 streaks of sword chi descended from the sky and slashed at the sword will, causing it to become even more terrifying. This was a fatal situation. This terrifying might cause many onlookers to retreat. The Heavens Pivot Saint Sun really wanted to kill Xiaoyu, the top genius of the Heavens Pivot Holy Ground. With this kind of attack, even a divine soul realm expert with a 4-step soul ladder would die. Not to mention that Xiaoyu had only condensed 1 step of the soul ladder. Even if his fighting capacity was amazing, his physical defense couldn't keep up. Swish! The 6 slaughtering swordsmen held their long swords, landing in the distance. The rain fell again, drenching them. The rainwater dripped along the edge of the long swords, smashing on the ground, splashing. They panted heavily, their hearts shivering. This Xiaoyu was worthy of being the top genius of the Heavens Pivot Holy Ground. He was worthy of being the person that the Great Elder valued. He was a monstrous genius that could possibly squeeze out the Saint Son of Lianqing. The 6 of them joined forces, but it was so difficult to kill him. If they let him grow, it would definitely be a nightmare. But now, everything was over. Even Lianqing had made his move. The power of that sword was incomparably terrifying. In addition to the 6 of them joining forces to besiege him, Xiaoyu should have been completely torn apart by the sword energy. On the 2nd floor of the restaurant, Lianqing also sat solemnly. His eyes bloomed with silver light, as if he could see through everything. However, Xiaoyu was completely shrouded by the violent sword energy. For a moment, he couldn't see it clearly. All of a sudden, the sword energy spread out. Lianqing's silver eyes suddenly shrank, as if he couldn't believe it. How could it be? Lianqing stood up from his seat, his face as gloomy as water. The chair he sat on was completely shattered, crushed into powder by the sword intent bursting out from his body. He didn't die. Xiaoyu, oh Xiaoyu, you're really lucky. Lianqing clenched his fists, his face extremely gloomy. His original gentle smile had disappeared. He originally believed that Xiaoyu would definitely die in the previous sure-kill situation, as even he had taken action. He and the Great Elder had agreed that if he were to make a move, he would be breaking the rules. However, even though he had disregarded his reputation and made a move, he was still unable to kill Xiaoyu. Bufang held the umbrella, and the rainwater flowed down along its length. Xiaoyu opened her eyes and looked at the place full of sword wills. Bufang's expression was very calm. His pitch-black pupils seemed to have seen through all the sword wills and saw a figure among them. Rip! A wave of domineering aura slowly spread out. Instantly, the surging sword intent that filled the sky was completely shattered. A sword cry accompanied by a whistling sound, and a sword light flew out from the place where the sword aura pervaded, flying towards where Lianqing was. Lianqing stood on the second floor of the restaurant with his hands clasped behind his back. He raised one hand, and that sword light floated in front of him. The light dispersed, revealing a dazzling sword blade. This was a long sword at the divine artifact level. The sword blade was penetrating and sharp, with a dazzling luster. Lianqing pinched his sword fingers, and that long sword turned into a beam of flowing light, instantly returning to the sheath, falling behind his back. "You're really lucky." Lianqing coldly looked at the figure that was slowly emerging. Xiao Yu's eyes were bloodshot, and a lot of his hair had been chopped off. The broken hair on his forehead was fluttering. He opened his mouth, constantly exhaling and inhaling. The sword intent on his body was fluctuating, and his aura was constantly rising. It was as if there was a rumbling sound echoing. His lips were red and swollen, and his eyes seemed to have a sparkling luster. "Spicy. Honorbu." Xiao Yu roared hoarsely, and his tears almost came out. How could this rampage ramen be so spicy? It seemed to be different from what he had eaten before. However, although it was spicy, the effect was surprisingly good. Xiao Yu felt that his fighting capacity had skyrocketed, reaching a realm that he couldn't even imagine. Perhaps, at this moment, he could be compared to a divine soul realm expert with a 3-step soul ladder. The point was, his current body was incomparably tough, as if it was blooming with a sparkling luster. His strength was unparalleled, and one punch could smash the mountains and rivers. Honorbu's noodles were as tough as ever. "Ha ha! Spicy good. Cool." Xiao Yu roared, his hair fluttering. The raindrops falling from the sky seemed to be blown away by his roar. The faces of the 6 slaughter swordsmen instantly changed. They held their swords, and their auras burst out. However, they shockingly found that the 6 people's sword intent couldn't suppress Xiao Yu's sword intent alone. When did this guy become so strong? They were a little puzzled. Noodles? A bowl of noodles can have such an effect? Lianqing's silver eyes twinkled as if he had seen through something. He muttered, "No wonder Xiao Yu would seek a bowl of noodles in this desperate situation." The effect of this noodles was beyond all of their expectations. What Lianqing had seen was right. That noodles weren't ordinary noodles. Those lines, those energy were simply terrifying. "Kill him. We must kill him." Taking advantage of the fact that Xiao Yu's aura hadn't reached its peak yet, Lianqing's palm slapped the railing on the second floor of the restaurant. The entire railing exploded. His cold words were deafening. The 6 slaughter swordsmen nodded. With a roar, their sword energy soared, cutting the raindrops on the ground. Boom, boom, boom. The 6 of them stepped on the water, dashing forward. The swords rang out, and the slaughter arrived. However, this time, no one knew who would be the one. Killing who? Xiao Yu felt as if his body had turned into an oven, with energy surging unceasingly. His eyes were bright, and the corners of his mouth cracked, revealing an insolent smile. Holding the sword with one hand, he took a step, and the ground shook. Buzz in a flash, Xiao Yu appeared in front of a swordsman. That swordsman's eyes widened, and his heart shivered. He felt a wave of murderous intent shrouding him. His figure spiraled up, and his sword energy swept out, as if he had turned into a swallow. One power to break 10,000 techniques. Kill! Xiao Yu's muscles bulged, and a terrifying power roared, making his sword energy seem overbearing. No matter how gorgeous that swordsman's technique was, Xiao Yu directly slashed out with his sword. Boom! The sword light instantly dispersed. The long sword of that swordsman, who was spiraling like a swallow, directly cracked under Xiao Yu's sword, turning into fragments that filled the sky, falling messily. However, Xiao Yu's sword didn't stop. With a murderous intent, it slashed down. A ripping sound rang out. That swordsman was cut into 2 halves by Xiao Yu. Blood splattered in the sky. The raging sword intent caused the swordsman's body to explode. Xiao Yu landed, and the sky full of raindrops fell, turning into a rain of blood, bloody and violent. Xiao Yu breathed heavily, and his mouth was red and swollen. However, there was a fire burning in his chest. Bufong raised his hand, covering Xiao Yu's eyes. "Children shouldn't look," Bufong calmly said. Xiao Yu obediently nodded her head. The remaining 5 swordsmen looked at Xiao Yu with incomparable shock. Was this still the guy who was at their mercy just now? How did he suddenly become so powerful? With one slash, he killed their comrade. Even the sword was smashed into pieces. Such a big change, just because of a bowl of noodles? Xiao Yu tilted his head, and his eyes coldly and ruthlessly looked at the 5 people in the distance. The long sword's edge fell on the ground, and he slowly walked forward. The sword edge and the ground made a cutting sound, which was incomparably ear-piercing. It made the bodies of the 5 swordsmen in the distance have goosebumps. 6 great killing swordsmen, right? Bloody executioners, right? You want to kill me, Xiao Yu, right? Then all of you can die. Xiao Yu's eyes were bloodshot, and there was a crazed look in them. With one step, his figure suddenly disappeared. Sword energy filled the air. The raindrops were hit by the sword energy, and they all flew out like sharp arrows, piercing toward the 5 swordsmen. Ding! 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 The 5 swordsmen waved their long swords, blocking the raindrops. However, in the next instant, their bodies suddenly stiffened. Xiao Yu had already approached them. True energy surged, and the sword energy surged. As the swords slashed down, the dragon-like sword energy seemed to be roaring. The 5 swordsmen let out a long whistle, and they all tried to resist. However, the long swords in their hands were all shattered, and they vomited blood as they were sent flying. Everyone's eyes were filled with fear. They finally knew why Xiao Yu could kill their comrade with one slash. This guy's strength had become extremely terrifying. Xiao Yu was originally famous for his terrifying strength, and the sword in his hand could actually be considered a heavy sword. Under the ferocious power of the heavy sword, it was not difficult for it to cut a living swordsman in half. Now, Xiao Yu's strength had become even more terrifying, and their hearts were all trembling. Lianxing stood high up, and his silver eyes gradually dispersed, revealing pitch-black pupils. He stared at Xiao Yu, his face gloomy and murderous. Xiao Yu dragged his sword, tilting his head to look at Lianxing. The corners of his mouth rose, full of ridicule and disdain. "Xiao Yu, you dare!" The sword energy on Lianxing's body surged, and he coldly opened his mouth. Xiao Yu looked at Lianxing, grinning. His mouth was red and swollen, and his appearance was quite comical. All of a sudden, Xiao Yu stretched out his hand, giving Lianxing the middle finger. The long sword swept past, and the heads of the 5 swordsmen, which were filled with fear, were sent flying. Boom! Lianxing's eyes turned red, and the long sword on his back suddenly soared into the sky with a clanging sound. However, a black shadow slowly floated down, landing behind him. His hand grabbed the long sword, and he put it back into the scabbard. "Saint Sun, you have an agreement with the Great Elder that you will not personally take action. Previously, you have already violated the taboo." This black shadow's voice was clear and beautiful, and it was actually a woman's voice. However, there was a bit of heroic spirit in her voice. After Lianxing heard the woman's words, the aura on his body also dispersed. He looked at Xiao Yu and took a deep breath. "Junior brother Yu is indeed extraordinary. Senior brother has underestimated you. We will meet again." A gentle smile hung on Lianxing's face once again. His figure turned, and he walked downstairs. Xiao Yu's red and swollen lips tightly stared at the black shadow, and his gaze was somewhat complicated. That black shadow was wrapped in a black robe, and there seemed to be a line of sight falling from it. The black shadow also gave Xiao Yu a deep look, and with a soft sigh, its figure disappeared with a swoosh. Both of them disappeared, and Xiao Yu immediately grinned. He turned around and cupped his hands toward Bufong. "Thank you, Owner Bu, for the ramen. It's still the same recipe, and it's still the same taste. I really miss it." Xiao Yu's mouth was bleeding, and the aura on his body was quickly receding. After the rampage ramen and the vigorous beef meatball exploded, he would also be a little weak. Moreover, for a long time, Xiaoyu would not be able to obtain the enhancement from the functional delicacies. Bu Fong indifferently looked at Xiaoyu, and he nodded his head. Owner Bu, this trip is to participate in the Glutton God's banquet, right? Why don't you come with me? When the time comes, we can enter the banquet together, Xiaoyu said to Bu Fong with a smile. Bu Fong was taken aback, and his eyebrows twitched as he looked at Xiaoyu. That's fine. When the time comes, you can bring this girl along. This girl has been looking forward to the Glutton God's banquet for a long time. Bu Fong's words stunned Xiaoyu. Owner Bu is not going to the Glutton God's banquet. The corners of Bu Fong's mouth twitched, and he turned his head to look at the misty sunset lake under the curtain of rain. It was like a prehistoric giant beast, and he indifferently said, I have more important things to do. Noodle King Restaurant, the Heavenly Springs Saint's son slowly walked out of the noodle house. A red-clothed maid opened an oil paper umbrella and shielded him from the rain. The Heavenly Springs Saint's son clasped his hands, and his indifferent eyes looked into the distance. Lanji, go find that chef. He killed my Heavenly Springs woman, and he must pay with his blood. Bring the golden armored guards, and bring that chef's head to me. Chapter 659. Yes, Your Highness, Saint's son. The maid in blue was like a lotus flower emerging from the water. Her face was elegant, and her body was slim. Her face was like a goose egg, and her skin was white and tender. She bowed to the Heavenly Springs Saint's son. A moment later, she turned around and stepped into the rainwater. Several guards donned in golden armor followed behind the blue-clothed lady and walked into the distance, slowly disappearing into the curtain of rain. Chi-Ji, let's go. Seeing the blue-clothed maid disappear, the Heavenly Springs Saint's son brushed aside a strand of hair on his forehead, talking to the red-clothed girl who was holding the oil paper umbrella for him. The red-clothed girl was also very beautiful. Her face was like a doll, delicate and cute. Her big eyes blinked as if they could talk. Can Lan Jiji kill that chef? But Lu Jiejie is dead. Your Highness, why don't you let little Chi do it? The red-clothed girl blinked her eyes, her face excited. The Heavenly Springs Saint's son curled his lips. He raised his hand and gently knocked the red-clothed girl's forehead. You little girl, don't mess around. Lan Ji is more reliable than you. The red-clothed girl held the umbrella with one hand and touched her forehead with the other. Her face beamed with happiness. Little Chi wants to do something for your Highness. All right, let's go back. The Glutton God's banquet is about to begin, said the Heavenly Springs Saint's son. The red-clothed girl didn't say anything. She held the umbrella and followed the Heavenly Springs Saint's son into the curtain of rain. Ouyang Chanfeng stood at the entrance of the noodle house. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked into the distance. Looking at the pattering rain, he exhaled. I'm afraid something big is going to happen at the Glutton God's banquet this time. Holding an oil paper umbrella, Bu Fong pulled Xiaoyu's hand and followed behind a group of people. Xiaoyu was supported by several people, walking slowly in front of them. The Glutton God's city was huge, with complicated streets. Bu Fong looked around from time to time and saw many shops, from which a thick aroma diffused. Xiaoyu widened her eyes and looked around curiously. Looking at the restaurants, she couldn't help but swallow her saliva. The little girl had only heard about the Glutton God City from her grandfather. She had never thought that she would be able to visit the Glutton God City in person. The Glutton God City was just like what his grandfather had said. There were delicious foods everywhere. Big brother, look, that's the dragon meat restaurant Grandpa told Xiaoyu about before. There are all kinds of dragon meat delicacies inside. Xiaoyu's eyes were sharp. She saw a splendidly decorated restaurant in the distance. She pulled on Bu Fong's sleeve and shouted excitedly. Bu Fong was stunned. Dragon meat restaurant. This restaurant is quite interesting. Bu Fong was very good at cooking dragon meat. Back in the Light Wind Empire, Bu Fong was famous for cooking dragon meat. However, Bu Fong and the others did not enter at this time. Instead, they walked along the street and entered a residential area. This was the place that the Valley of Gluttony had specially prepared for the experts who came from outside the valley to stay. After walking for a long time under the curtain of rain, they finally reached their destination. It was a spacious courtyard. This was Xiao Yu's residence. Xiao Yu's subordinates were also staying there. Bu Fong entered the courtyard with Xiao Yu. After Xiao Yu had arranged a place for Bu Fong, he returned to his room to recuperate. In this battle, his body was densely covered with wounds. His entire body seemed to have turned into a bloody man. Fresh blood dripped from his body, and it was incomparably terrifying. If it weren't for the rampage ramen and the vigorous beef meatball, Xiao Yu would have died under the swords of the 6 powerful swordsmen. The 6 swordsmen under the Saint Son of Heaven's pivot, Lianxing, had a high cultivation base. They were the 6 sharp daggers in Lianxing's hands. The existence of the 6 swordsmen was similar to the 3 maids of the heavenly springs Saint Sun. Tomorrow is the glutton god's banquet. Your Excellency can rest in the mansion. After young Master Yu recovers, we will go together. The glutton god's banquet in the Valley of Gluttony is a grand event of the Hidden Dragon Royal Court. There will be all kinds of delicious food. Your Excellency will definitely not be disappointed. A middle-aged man who looked like a housekeeper said to Bu Fong with a smile. Bu Fong indifferently looked at the middle-aged man. Although the latter's face was full of smiles, Bu Fong didn't feel any kindness from him. Bu Fong's mental energy was extremely strong, far surpassing those of the same realm. Hence, he could clearly feel the changes in emotions. Okay, I will take a walk. Bu Fong clasped his hands, nodding his head as he said. In the next moment, under the housekeeper's gaze, he turned around and walked out of the courtyard. The housekeeper's face was still full of smiles. Looking at Bu Fong's back as he left, the smile on his face quickly disappeared. He flicked his hand, and a white jade talisman fell into his palm. His mind flickered, and a wave of energy surged into the jade talisman. The jade talisman shattered, and a message was sent out. The corners of the housekeeper's mouth twitched, revealing a cold smile. Then, he turned around and left. Bu Fong walked out of the courtyard. The rain in the sky had become lighter, and only a light drizzle was falling. He clasped his hands, stepping on the puddles as he slowly walked. He didn't care much about the so-called glutton god's banquet. He was more concerned about how to catch the heaven-swallowing spiritual spotfish in the Sunset Lake. The Sunset Lake was vast, and there were countless powerful spirit beasts in the lake. How should he catch them? It was really a headache for him. On both sides of the glutton god city, there were many different kinds of restaurants. Bu Fong strolled in front of the restaurants. Looking at the colorful restaurants, he couldn't help but furrow his brows. He chose a restaurant and walked in. As soon as he entered, shadows carrying long swords on their backs appeared. Those shadows exchanged looks, then glanced at the restaurant's signboard before disappearing again. Bu Fong, who had just stepped into the restaurant, naturally had no idea what was happening outside. This restaurant was deserted, which was different from the popular restaurants in the Glutton God City. Compared to those popular restaurants, this restaurant was very small. There were only a few tables and chairs. Although the restaurant was small, its hygiene and environment were quite good. It was clean and tidy. After Bu Fong entered it, he turned around. A short-haired girl walked over from the counter. The girl smiled at Bu Fong. She was wearing a chef's robe, but it wasn't a first-grade chef's robe. Obviously, the chef of this restaurant wasn't this girl. "Welcome. What would you like to order?" The girl said with a smile. "How can I order dishes if you don't give me the menu?" Bu Fong sat on his seat, tilted his head, looked at the girl, and asked in puzzlement. The smile on the girl's face became wider. "Sir, you don't know. Chef Wenren of our restaurant doesn't like to have a menu. Whatever you want to eat, just order. If Chef Wenren can cook, he will. If he can't, he won't cook," said the short-haired girl. "Oh," Bu Fong was surprised, arching his brows. Didn't like to have a menu? Ordering whatever he wanted to eat. The chef of this restaurant was a little crazy, even crazier than him. However, such a crazy chef was the chef that Bu Fong wanted to find. Bu Fong's lips curled up, his eyes falling on the girl. When Bu Fong looked at the girl, she didn't know why, but she suddenly felt her body tighten. That kind of gaze was the same as Chef Winrance. "Do you have a dish with the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish?" asked Bufong. "Heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish?" The girl was bewildered. She took a deep breath, looking at Bufong in disbelief. "Sir, you're not joking, right?" The girl looked at Bufong in disbelief. The heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish was a kind of spirit beast in the Sunset Lake. That spirit beast was extremely ferocious, with a surging murderous aura. It was a very terrifying and ruthless spirit beast. Moreover, it was very difficult to catch the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish. Even if it was caught, it would be much more difficult to handle than ordinary fish. Because once it was handled wrongly, the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish would turn from a delicacy into a deadly poison. It could even poison a divine physique echelon expert to death. Even in the holy land of delicacies, the valley of gluttony, not many people would eat this fish. The young man in front of her wanted to eat such a dish as soon as he entered the restaurant. Was he causing trouble? "What? You can't make it?" Bufong frowned, asking suspiciously. Bufong didn't know how difficult it was to cook the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish. He was just a little suspicious. At this moment, the girl's expression became a little embarrassed. "Oh, if you can't make it, then forget it." Bufong's face was also a little regretful. He thought he could see the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish. In the end, this restaurant was just a squib. Cough, cough, cough. "You want to eat the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish?" Just as the girl was feeling extremely awkward, a slender figure walked out of the kitchen. That person was thin and slender, with a pale face and a thin body. He was wearing a chef's robe, which was similar to Ouyang Chinfeng's. Obviously, this skinny young man in front of him was a first-grade chef. "Yes." Bufong looked at the young man, nodding his head. The young man held a bamboo jar in his hand. He removed the lid and drank a mouthful of the liquid in the jar. A wave of wine fragrance wafted out, and Bufong's heart couldn't help but be moved. "If you want to eat the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish, of course you can. I can cook it, but the restaurant doesn't have the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish as an ingredient. If you want to eat it, you have to hunt it yourself." The youth walked to Bufong's side, pulled out a chair, and sat down. He squinted at Bufong, suddenly shivering. That was because he discovered an aura from Bufong's body. That aura actually made him feel nervous. "You're also a chef?" The young man squinted at Bufong, looking at him while drinking a mouthful of wine. "Yes. Do you know how to catch the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish?" Bufong asked. If the other knew how to cook the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish, he should know how to catch it. The young man's mouth twitched, gently exhaling a breath full of the smell of wine. "If you want to eat fish, then go fishing." "Fishing, understand? Go fishing in the Sunset Lake." The young man stood up, holding the bamboo pot and waving at Bufong. Then, he walked to the kitchen again. "However, I have to remind you that you can fish, but be careful not to be eaten by the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish. If you become fish dung, it will be interesting." "Ha ha!" The young man laughed, his figure gradually disappearing. However, Bufong fell into deep thought after hearing the young man's words. "That's right. Fishing. Go fishing in the Sunset Lake. If you want to eat fish, go fishing. Go fishing for the spiritual spot fish in the Sunset Lake." The corners of Bufong's mouth twitched. He stood up, his eyes shining as he looked at the direction of the kitchen. That chef was a little interesting. At first glance, he seemed to have a story. When he returned from fishing for the spiritual spot fish, he would listen to the chef's story. Thus, under the astonished gaze of the short-haired girl, Bufong walked out of the restaurant. As soon as Bufong walked out of the restaurant, his feet stepped on the puddles, splashing water everywhere. Bufong's heart suddenly shivered. Several sword lights suddenly swayed from the darkness, overflowing with murderous aura. Chapter 660. The attack of the sword intent was very sudden. The water that had been trampled on had not yet splashed, but the sword intent shot out from the splashing water. It was so sharp that it could even cut the air. The terrifying power roared, bringing up a wave of terrifying waves. Bufong furrowed his brows, and goosebumps appeared all over his body. Black shadows dashed out from the darkness, their murderous aura cold. The sword intent had almost turned into tangible sword energy, attacking Bufong from all directions. It seemed to have formed a fatal situation, and they wanted to kill Bufong completely. Bufong stood at his spot. His vermilion robe fluttered in the wind that was stirred up by the sword energy, emitting a brilliant radiance. Spoiling the Saint Sun's plan. The Saint Sun has ordered to take your head. A hoarse voice rang out. In an instant, the sword chi became even more berserk, causing the water on the ground to splash up. The splashing water turned into sharp long swords, wanting to pierce through Bufong. Saint Sun's order? Bufong furrowed his brows. Could it be the heavenly spring, Saint Sun? But he did not spoil the heavenly spring, Saint Sun's plan. Could it be the heavens pivot Saint Sun, Lianqing? That was possible. Bufong's heart shuddered. Feeling the sword energy that filled the sky, a murderous aura appeared on his face. Green smoke curled up from his hand, and suddenly, the black turtle constellation walk appeared. The black turtle constellation walk spun, covering Bufong's figure. The sword energy that filled the sky hit the black turtle constellation walk, but it did not leave a mark on the walk. It only made the walk tremble slightly. The black shadow swordsmen were a little frightened. They quickly retreated, landing in the distance, and surrounded Bufong's figure. In the next instant, the black turtle constellation walk soared up into the sky. It instantly shrunk, and Bufong held it in his hand. Bufong's cold eyes scanned the surrounding swordsmen. However, just as the swordsmen were about to make their move, two figures slowly walked out of the restaurant behind Bufong. You guys are fighting in front of my restaurant. Are you looking down on my restaurant for not having any customers? The thin figure leaned against the door frame, opened the bamboo lid, and poured a mouthful of wine into his mouth. The slightly turbid yellow wine flowed down from the corner of his mouth, and he wiped it off with a flick of his sleeve. He glanced at the crowd with a cold expression. It's first-grade chef Wenren Shang. Why did he come out? Didn't you say that Wenren Shang's restaurant doesn't meddle in other people's business? The few black shadow swordsmen immediately frowned. They exchanged glances and saw the seriousness in each other's eyes. Wenren Shang was a first-grade chef. Although he didn't have a good reputation in the Valley of Gluttony, he was still a first-grade chef. He was in existence on the same level as Ouyang Chenfeng. These black shadow swordsmen were still a little afraid of him. Chef Wenren, the Holy Sun is handling a matter. Can you give him some face? Swordsman said coldly. He swung his sword and it trembled slightly. Holy Sun? There are so many Holy Suns in the Hidden Dragon Royal Court. How would I know which one you're working for? Why should I care? Just don't cause trouble in front of my restaurant. Get lost. Wenren Shang impatiently waved his hand, pouring another mouthful of wine. Instantly, the thick wine aroma spread in his mouth, making him unfurrow his brows. The black shadow swordsmen's faces were cold. They whispered to each other, exchanged glances, and finally, their gazes landed on Bufong. Chef Wenren, sorry to offend you. This person has ruined the Holy Sun's business. The Holy Sun has ordered us to take his head. The swordsman said. In the next instant, his figure shot out at an extremely fast speed. Sword energy crisscrossed, buzzing unceasingly as if it wanted to tear the illusionary void apart, slashing at Bufong. The other swordsmen also made their moves at the same time. The atmosphere suddenly became sharp, and murderous aura surged from all directions. Bufong gently exhaled. His face was expressionless. However, when Bufong was about to make his move, Wenren Shang, who was leaning against the door, suddenly straightened his body. The bamboo tube shook slightly, and a drop of turbid yellow wine shot out. That drop of wine floated in front of Wenren Shang. The latter glanced at the group of swordsmen, then flicked his finger. Immediately, the wine liquid splashed and turned into countless wine arrows that shot out. It was as beautiful as a fairy scattering flowers. Bang, bang, bang. The sounds exploded. Instantly, the black shadow swordsmen, who were dashing forward, were hit by a terrifying force, flying backward. Swoosh! The swordsman's eyes were filled with fear, looking deeply at Wenren Shang. Chef Wenren Shang, do you really want to obstruct the Holy Sun's business? Be careful not to offend someone you shouldn't offend. A black shadow swordsman said coldly. Wenren Shang frowned, looking at that person. He raised his palm, and a turbid yellow drop of wine floated above his palm. The wine drop was perfectly round, with light moving inside it. It seemed energy was surging inside it. If you talk more, you'll die, said Wenren Shang. Bufang was surprised, looking at Wenren Shang. He put away the black turtle constellation walk. Wenren Shang was really domineering. Was he helping him, or was it just for the restaurant principles? However, no matter what, Bufang just gave Wenren Shang a slight nod. When those black shadows heard Wenren Shang's cold words, they shivered. Wenren Shang, who was unpredictable, didn't give them the confidence to kill Bufang and escape unscathed. Thus, they chose to retreat. Gradually, they disappeared into the rain. Raindrops continued to fall from the sky and splattered on the ground. Bufang nodded to Wenren Shang. His body swayed, disappearing into the curtain of rain. Chef Wenren, why did you help him? He came to the restaurant to stir up trouble. He wanted to eat the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish. The short-haired girl looked at Wenren Shang skeptically. Wenren Shang's mouth twitched. His lanky figure turned around and entered the restaurant, gulping down more wine. That kid is interesting. If he dies so early, the glutton god's banquet won't be interesting anymore. The short-haired girl didn't really understand. She looked at the direction Bufang had disappeared, then at Wenren Shang's direction. She was bewildered. After Bufang's figure disappeared, at a corner, a figure appeared. The girl in blue indifferently looked at Bufang's back as he left. Behind her was a group of golden-armored warriors. The aura of those golden-armored warriors was really intimidating. Just by standing at their spots, they could create explosions in the air. Madame Lanji, do you want to take action? Asked a golden-armored warrior with a powerful voice. The girl in blue was like a lotus flower rising from the water. Her eyes were like water. Looking at Bufang's disappearing figure, she shook her head. Forget it. This is Wenren Shang's place. It won't be good if Wenren Shang takes action. Wenren Shang is the most mysterious chef among the first-grade chefs in the Valley of Gluttony. Even His Highness, the Saint Sun, doesn't want to offend him. We shouldn't create more trouble. After listening to her, the golden-armored warriors nodded and said nothing. All they had to do was obey. Follow that chef. When the time is right, kill him. The girl in blue was still as ethereal as a fairy. However, her words were filled with murderous aura. Bufang left the restaurant, walking forward. He was thinking about how to fish in the Sunset Lake. If he wanted to fish, he must have fishing tools, such as a fishing rod or bait. He had no idea how to use them. Bufang clasped his hands as he walked in the rain. He slowly walked out of the Gluttony God City, coming to the dense forest by the Sunset Lake. There, towering trees grew, swaying unceasingly. Spirit energy was abundant there. Bufang walked in the forest, stepping on the soft ground. His face was a little surprised, and then the corners of his mouth curled up. He looked at the towering trees, the corners of his mouth rising. Boom! Rumble! A tree fell with a loud rumble. It was directly cut in half and fell to the ground, crushing many shrubs. Bufang held onto the straight tree trunk with one hand and slowly walked forward, causing the tree trunk to rub against the ground and the bark to crack. Only then did he walk out of the thicket and arrive at the shore of the Sunset Lake. I should make a fishing rod. Coincidentally, the system dimensional bag has a spirit beast tendon. Bufang rubbed his chin, thinking. A moment later, green smoke twirled in his hand. The dragon bone kitchen knife flew out, shining with a sparkling light. Bufang twirled the knife in his hand, taking out a spicy strip from the system dimensional bag. Holding in his mouth, he held the kitchen knife and slashed horizontally. Shortly after, The tree was shaved by Bu Fong's knife energy. However, it was still as thick as before. From the system dimensional bag, Bu Fong took out a silver spirit beast tendon. After stringing it on the rod, Bu Fong looked at his self-made fishing rod with satisfaction. Although it was a little ugly, it had all the functions. Attaching a hook to the spirit beast tendon, Bu Fong held the tree trunk with both hands, slowly walking out. He stepped on the lakeside and suddenly waved his hand. Suddenly, the huge tree trunk swayed and the spirit beast tendons tied to it shot out. With a crashing sound, they fell into the lake and were submerged by the waves. Bu Fong stood by the lake, facing the strong wind. The vermilion robe on his body fluttered, and the spirit beast tendon was straightened. All of a sudden, Bu Fong's brows twitched. What the hell? He hadn't even put out the bait, and there was already a fish on the hook? In the next instant, Bu Fong took a step back. His arms exerted force, and in an instant he pulled the tree trunk up. With a splash, the spirit beast tendon shook, and the lake water burst. From the lake, a ferocious spirit beast was pulled out. That spirit divine beast splashed water, and its eyes were filled with cruelty. What fish is this? Bu Fong was startled. A fish that could be caught without bait. It couldn't be anything good, right? That fish rushed out of the water, and its eyeballs turned, falling on Bu Fong. Instantly, a cruel light shot out in all directions. It opened its mouth, and its sharp teeth reflected the light. Roar! A fierce roar resounded. In the next instant, that ferocious beast fiercely bit at Bu Fong. Bu Fong carried the fishing rod with one hand. With a shake of his hand, the black turtle constellation Wok appeared, and he fiercely smashed it on the head of that ferocious beast. Swoosh! That ferocious beast fell back into the sunset lake. That's an ugly fish. Is it the ingredient for the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish? Not bad. It could be used as bait. Bu Fong exhaled. A moment later, his arms exerted force again. With a splash, the lake water exploded, and that ferocious beast was pulled out one more time. The ferocious beast was bewildered. Seeing Bu Fong, it opened its mouth, roaring again. Bu Fong's brows arched, and he fiercely smashed the black turtle constellation Wok. With a dong sound, the fish released a roar. Its body was smashed until it staggered backwards, its sharp teeth shattering into the sky. After a while, Bu Fong shouldered the fishing rod and grabbed the ugly fish with one hand, walking out of the lake. Meanwhile, in the glutton god city, the blue-clothed lady slowly walked forward. As she strode forward, the raindrops in the sky seemed to freeze. Her eyes gazed at Bu Fong's direction, her face cold. Behind her, the golden-armored guard clanged, his murderous aura thick. Chapter 661. The ugly earth fish, just like its name, was ugly to a certain extent. Its body was full of protruding lumps, and its fish bones were ferocious and sharp. When its gills opened and closed, viscous juice would drip down. Bu Fong looked at the fish, and his brows couldn't help but furrow. This fish was really ugly, so ugly that it made people lose their appetite. However, since it was an ingredient of the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish, there should be something different about it. The golden dragon bone kitchen knife spun, and Bu Fong quickly dealt with the ugly earth fish. Perhaps it should be said that the ugly earth fish's appearance was extremely ugly, but its interior was exquisite. The lines on the fish's flesh were very neat, and it also emitted a faint fragrance. No wonder the heaven-swallowing spiritual spot fish would eat this ugly earth fish. It turned out that the fish's flesh was excellent, and it was a top-notch ingredient. Tying the cut fish to the fine iron hook, Bu Fong gently exhaled. The preparation work was finally done. Carrying the fishing rod and bait, Bu Fong put away the fishing rod and bait. He strode forward and walked toward the center of the sunset lake. The sky gradually darkened. The rain in the sky was surging and brewing, and no one knew when it would be released. Carrying the fishing rod, standing by the lake, facing the surging lake water, Bufong's long hair fluttered in the wind, and the vermilion robe on his body also fluttered. The rain falling from the sky was blocked by an invisible force around his body. With a wave of his hand, a black shadow appeared. A small boat instantly fell on the lake, swaying along with the ripples of the lake water. Bufong took a step forward, landing on the small boat. He carried the fishing rod, his face indifferent as he looked at the endless lake. The surging mental power immediately spread out, and the small boat was like a stone that had fallen into a calm lake, causing ripples to spread out. A buzzing sound resounded. Suddenly, a wave of energy acted on the boat, causing it to slowly float away. Bufong sat cross-legged at the front of the boat, still carrying the fishing rod. He didn't throw out because he felt that it wasn't the right position yet. The curtain of rain covered the sky, and the bead curtain closed. The figure of Bufong, sitting alone on the small boat, gradually disappeared in the curtain of rain. He swam toward the center of the Sunset Lake. He decided to fish in the Sunset Lake for Real. Sunset Lakeside. Silhouettes slowly appeared one after another. A gust of wind blew, causing the blue-robed woman's dress to flutter. Her slender figure was very conspicuous under the wind's outline. She frowned as she watched Bufong's figure gradually disappear into the night. She was extremely puzzled. What is this chef trying to do? The blue-clothed woman muttered softly. Madame Longi, the Sunset Lake is in front of us. It's very dangerous in the rain. Should we continue? Asked a golden armor guard. In the rain, the Sunset Lake was like a terrifying beast opening its ferocious mouth. People couldn't help but feel afraid, not daring to move forward. Move forward. The Saint Sun has ordered us to kill that chef. Longi's voice was still cold. After saying that, she strode forward with her straight, jade-like legs, stepping on the lake's surface, heading toward the center of the lake. The golden armor guards exchanged looks, but they didn't say anything. They carried their heavy weapons and stepped into the rolling waves. The Glutton God City was bustling as soon as the curtain of night fell. Although it was raining, the long street of the Glutton God City was still a boiling cauldron of voices. It seemed like the diners and chefs hiding in the restaurants had all appeared. They were holding candles in their hands. Even though it was raining, they still had to carefully protect the flames in the candles. The crowd slowly moved, heading toward the center of the Glutton God City. In the center of the Glutton God City, there was an incomparably glorious building. It was a towering building with bright lights. It had 10 floors, and each floor was dazzling. This building was square with a hollow center, which was a vast square with countless seats. At the center of the square, there was an incomparably black stone tablet that reached the sky. That stone tablet was simple and unadorned, with many names recorded on it. Spirit energy twirled around it, which made it really mysterious. It was the tablet of Gluttony's tablet of gluttony. The names written on it were the top chefs of the Valley of Gluttony, who were at least second-grade chefs. Only second-grade chefs could be listed on the tablet of gluttony. The building that covered the tablet was the Glutton God's building of the Valley of Gluttony. It was the biggest building in the Valley of Gluttony. Even the Hidden Dragon Continent. It was a famous building. The Glutton God's building had 10 floors, which was really spacious. Under the Glutton God's building, the crowd was like ants. Those ants turned into a stream of people, entering the Glutton God's building. Their faces were filled with anticipation as they waited for the Glutton God's banquet to start. A creaking sound rang out. Xiao Yu, who was wearing a white robe, walked out of the secret chamber. His aura was still a little weak, but at least his face looked better. After half a day of recovery, he had finally recovered some of his power. He had found Xiao Yu, but he didn't know where Bufong had gone. However, Bufong had told him before, so he wasn't surprised. He just looked at Xiao Yu curiously, bringing the little girl that Bufong cared a lot about out of the yard, walking toward the Glutton God's building. Tonight was the opening ceremony of the Glutton God's banquet. Almost all the experts in the city would attend to witness this grand event. Although the opening ceremony wasn't the most important part of the Glutton God's banquet, it was the one that attracted the most attention. In the Noodle King restaurant, Ouyang Chinfeng had ended his business early. He wore a clean chef robe, and with a warm smile on his face, he walked out, following the crowd toward the Glutton Gods building. Wen Renshang's body swayed as he walked out of the restaurant, holding a bamboo flask of wine. He walked toward the Glutton Gods building, preparing to participate in the opening ceremony. Many shops on a long street of the Glutton God City were closed. Experts and chefs walked out of the shops with their chests puffed out. The atmosphere of the entire Valley of Gluttony seemed to have changed at this moment. On the square of the Glutton Gods building, there were many tables and round platforms floating in the air. On those floating platforms, there were also seats. From a distance, they looked like twinkling stars. These seats were prepared for the experts from the big forces of the Hidden Dragon continent, and the seats below were for the diners. The Glutton Gods building was so huge that it was beyond imagination. The Heavenly Springs Saint's son had arrived. He clasped his hands behind his back. Tonight, he wasn't dressed casually. Instead, he was wearing golden armor. His aura was extremely sharp, like a spear that could pierce through the sky and earth. Behind him, there was a young girl in red. She was extremely beautiful, and she pouted her lips, looking quite charming. They entered the Glutton Gods building. Under the guidance of a waiter, they came to a floating platform. On the platform, precious fruits and spiritual herbs with spiritual energy were placed neatly. Moreover, a glowing wine bottle was placed on the table. Of course, the wine in that bottle was extraordinary. The Heavenly Springs Saint's son landed on the platform, his face peaceful. He slowly walked, sitting cross-legged in front of the table. Setting Sun Jade Spirit Wine. Just by smelling its fragrance, it's so beautiful. The Heavenly Springs Saint's son smiled faintly. In the distance, there was laughter in response. The Saint of Heaven's pivot, Lianxing, was full of smiles. He also stood on the platform and sat cross-legged in front of the dining table. He poured a glass of sparkling wine that emitted the brilliance of the setting sun. The sparkling wine sparkled in the wine glass. The Saint of Heaven's pivot swayed the wine glass and praised endlessly. A bell rang, and a woman shrouded in a white gauze dress landed on the platform like a fairy. This woman's aura was outstanding. She was like a banished fairy that made people respect her. When the Heavenly Springs Saint's son and the Heaven's Pivot's Saint's son saw her, they slightly bowed. Greetings, Heavenly Secret Saintess. Lianxing lightly raised his wine cup and said to the veiled woman with a smile. The Heavenly Springs Saint's son's eyes were hot. The corners of his mouth rose as he nodded. The Heavenly Secret Saintess's long black hair cascaded like a waterfall. Her eyes were so mesmerizing that they could enchant people. Facing the goodwill of the two saints' sons, this woman's eyes were indifferent. She didn't respond. Many experts from the Hidden Dragon Royal Court's forces had arrived. Many experts of the forces outside the Hidden Dragon Royal Court also landed. The Pill Palace's master, Luo Danxing, also had his place. Next to him were the sect master of the Grand Baron sect, the pavilion master of the Wind and Thunder Pavilion, and a group of peerless experts of the continent. This group of people gathered at the Glutton Gods banquet, which boosted the atmosphere of the banquet. Apart from the experts invited to the banquet, the local diners and chefs of the Valley of Gluttony also took their seats. Tonight was just the opening ceremony of the Glutton Gods banquet. It wasn't the real Glutton Gods banquet, but many people were looking forward to it, because tonight they could see the top monstrous chefs of the Valley of Gluttony. Their innate cooking skills were amazing. Even the saints' sons and saintesses of the Hidden Dragon Royal Court had to sell them some points. Among them, there was even a special grade chef of the Valley of Gluttony. Although the Glutton God banquet was a banquet, it was actually a great baptism for the chefs on the tablet of Gluttony. The Valley of Gluttony had many chefs who had been cultivating hard. They were waiting for such a chance to show off their skills at the Glutton Gods banquet. They wanted to climb to the top of the tablet of Gluttony or climb several ranks to shock the world. This was their chance, and it was also their chance. Thus, everyone treated it seriously. Boom! Rumble! When everyone was seated, thunder suddenly rumbled in the sky. The Glutton Gods building seemed to wake up at this moment. In the middle of the square, a figure slowly emerged. That figure was stooped, wearing a loose brocade robe. His face was stern. He clasped his hands. As soon as he appeared, the entire noisy glutton gods building quieted down. Everybody's eyes fell on that old man, and they all took in a breath of cold air. The great elder of the valley of gluttony. Chu Changsheng. A small boat slowly floated. No one knew when the rain in the sky had stopped, becoming lighter. No one knew when the wind calmed down, and no one knew when the waves quieted down. Bu Fong closed his eyes, sitting cross-legged on the small boat. He seemed to be asleep, and his breathing was steady. When the boat didn't move, Bu Fong opened his eyes. He exhaled softly and stood up, causing ripples to appear on the surface of the lake. His arm swung. Instantly, the fishing rod was thrown far away. With a soft thud, the bait on the hook fell into the lake. Just like that, he stood quietly on the boat, fishing in silence. Tap! Tap! Ripples appeared, and in the distance, silhouettes emerged from the mist that shrouded the surface of the lake. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.